Hey there, tonight we're diving into the gritty world of medieval tanning, where the truth is as pungent as the hides they worked with, and the scent of success was anything but sweet. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. There you are, standing ankle-deep in a murky mixture that smells like a concoction cooked up by a particularly mischievous witch. Welcome to the world of a medieval tanner, where your daily grind involves a job so vital yet so vilified that even your medieval neighbors might cross the street to avoid you. Let's just say, the fragrance of the past isn't always as rosy as romantic tales might suggest. So, what exactly does your charming occupation entail? Picture this. You've got a pile of raw animal hides, and your task is to transform them into leather. This isn't the sleek, polished leather of a modern designer handbag, but the rough and ready material that medieval life couldn't do without. From saddles to shoes, armor to book bindings, leather was the medieval equivalent of duct tape, indispensable and everywhere. In fact, by the 14th century, leather was so crucial that it was one of the most frequently traded commodities in European markets. But before you get too cozy with the notion of being a medieval leather mogul, let's dive into the nitty-gritty, or perhaps the nitty-grimy. Your day kicks off with the delightful task of soaking those hides in a lime solution to loosen the hair and any remaining flesh. This is no spa treatment. It's all about practicality. The lime is caustic, and while it does the job, it's not exactly kind to your skin. Think less beauty regimen, more industrial hazard. Once the hair and flesh are gone, it's time to introduce one of the more infamous elements of your craft, dog dung. That's right, you're about to get up close and personal with what's euphemistically called pure. This isn't some jokey medieval euphemism. Dog dung was genuinely referred to as pure because of its ammonia content, which helped to soften the hides. If you weren't knee-deep in this stuff, you'd probably be marveling at the irony of it all. But hey, at least it was free. Just another example of medieval resourcefulness in action. As a tanner, you're not just knee-deep in muck. You're also entrenched in a complex social hierarchy. While your work is essential for the community, your status is on the lower rung of the medieval ladder. The smell that clings to you, no matter how many times you wash, doesn't do you any favors. In a time when bathing was more of an occasional pastime than a daily ritual, standing out for your scent wasn't exactly desirable. Now, let's sprinkle some economic reality into this fragrant mix. Leather was in demand, but the profits didn't exactly trickle down to you, the hard-working tanner. Your earnings were modest at best. An acre of land could be purchased for around 20 shillings in 13th century England, yet your yearly wage might be somewhere around that amount, if you were lucky. It's enough to make you wonder why anyone would choose this career path. But remember, in the medieval world, choice wasn't always part of the equation. Many were born into the trade, following in the smelly footsteps of their forebears. Despite the social stigma and the less than pleasant working conditions, the importance of your work was undeniable. In an era when footwear was more about function than fashion, your leather was what kept feet dry and protected. And let's not forget the role of leather in armor. A knight without leather was like a rock star without a guitar. Even the nobility, who might turn their noses up at your presence, relied on your craftsmanship. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing the past. The medieval period wasn't all chivalry and courtly love. It was also a time of harsh realities. Your life expectancy as a tanner wasn't exactly long. Between the hazardous materials, lack of protective gear, and the general health conditions of the time, reaching the ripe old age of 40 was a feat worthy of celebration. The trade had its fair share of myths and misconceptions, too. Some believed that tanners were so accustomed to their work that they couldn't smell their own stench. While it's true that the human nose can become desensitized to familiar odors, it's a safe bet that you were painfully aware of your olfactory footprint. After all, it was a part of the job that followed you everywhere, like a particularly clingy ghost. So here you are, a vital cog in the medieval machine, working a job that's both indispensable and ostracizing. It's a tough gig, but someone's got to do it. And while the world around you might be stuck in the mud, you're busy turning that mud into something useful. You might not be a knight in shining armor, but without you, that knight would be a lot less shiny, and quite possibly barefoot. And in the unpredictable world of medieval warfare, that's a risk no one can afford to take. Now, while that knight's polished armor might catch the sun's gleam, your life in the shadows of the tanning pits was anything but glamorous. Sourcing hides was your first daily hurdle, and it wasn't as simple as popping down to the medieval equivalent of a butcher's market. You had to strike deals with butchers, farmers, and anyone else whose livelihood involved livestock. The hides you collected were often a byproduct of the meat industry, making you a crucial link in the medieval supply chain. If you were feeling particularly entrepreneurial, you might even try to cut deals with local hunters for exotic pelts. But let's be real, that was more of a gamble than a sure bet. Once you've secured your prize, the real fun begins. These hides were hairy, not so little monsters when you first got your hands on them. Your trusty tools included scrapers and knives, simple yet effective implements designed to strip away any remnants of flesh and hair. But let's not forget the medieval magic ingredient that really made your day: urine. Yes, you heard that right, urine. In an era lacking in chemical softeners, the ammonia in urine was a tanner's best friend. It wasn't just any old pee either. Collecting it was a whole community affair. Townsfolk would contribute to the cause, and you'd gather it up like a bizarre neighborhood lemonade stand. The ammonia acted as a natural cleanser and softener, breaking down the tough fibers of the hide. Talk about recycling. Once you've got your urine-soaked hides ready, it's time for a stint in the tanning pits. Picture a massive stew of oak bark, water, and hides simmering away in large vats. The tannins in the oak bark are what give this process its name, and these pits were the heart of your business. The hides would soak here for weeks, sometimes even months, depending on the season and the desired quality of the leather. It was a slow, painstaking process that demanded patience and precision. You couldn't exactly rush leather tanning like you could baking a medieval pie. The timing was crucial. Too short, and you'd end up with something akin to cardboard. Too long, and the leather would grow brittle. Now, let's talk economics. The cost of materials like oak bark and lime, not to mention the time investment, was substantial. Oak bark had to be harvested and transported, often from miles away, adding to your overhead. You might pay a few pence for a batch of bark, and when your annual income hovered around 20 to 30 shillings, every penny counted. But despite the expenses, the finished leather was a hot commodity. Leather was the medieval version of a blue-chip stock, and demand was constant. Yet, your profit margins were razor-thin, squeezed by the costs of materials and the whims of the market. In small towns, your operation might be a one-man show, with you handling every grimy step of the process. In larger cities, you could be part of a tanning guild, which offered some protection and resources, but also demanded dues and adherence to strict regulations. These guilds were the medieval answer to trade unions, controlling quality and ensuring that no one tanner undercut the others. They also served as a social network of sorts, where you could at least commiserate with fellow tanners about the latest price of lime or the best way to collect the freshest urine. The impact of your work rippled through the medieval economy. Leather was a staple in trade, and cities became hubs of leather production, with markets bustling with goods crafted from your handiwork. The shoes, saddles, and armor you helped create were crucial for trade and warfare, fueling economies and conquests alike. While you might not have seen much of this wealth trickle down, the role you played in keeping the medieval world moving was undeniable. Leather was more than just material. It was a currency of necessity that tied together the fabric of medieval life. Despite its indispensability, the tanning trade was a tough, unsanitary business. The tanning pits emitted a stench that could knock out even the most seasoned worker, and the chemicals you handled were hazardous. There were no OSHA regulations back then, so safety gear was non-existent. You learned the hard way to avoid splashing lime in your eyes or breathing in too deeply around the vats. Yet, amidst the grime and the grind, there was a rough-hewn artistry to the trade. Transforming raw, bloody hides into durable leather was a craft that required skill, experience, and a fair bit of grit. The social hierarchy might have placed you on a lower rung, but there was a certain pride in your work. The leather you produced was a testament to your perseverance and expertise, even if the customers never saw your face or knew your name. It's a wonder that amid the muck, you'd find moments of satisfaction, knowing you were part of something bigger, a hidden hero in the tapestry of medieval life. So, while the history books might gloss over your contributions, and the romantic tales of knights and damsels might forget to mention the humble tanner, your legacy was etched into every piece of leather that carried the weight of medieval society. You were the unsung craftsman, turning the raw and rugged into the refined and indispensable. And in a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's shoes or the protection of one's armor, your work was as vital as it was undervalued. For all the medieval glamour we love to picture, the life of a tanner was anything but a fairy tale. Sure, knights might have dazzled in their shiny armor, but you, the tanner, were the uncelebrated craftsman, ensuring that armor didn't fall apart mid-joust. Let's face it, in the social pecking order, you were more footnote than headline. Your trade was vital, but that didn't grant you front row seats at the local jousting match or an invite to the Lord's banquet. Instead, you had a one-way ticket to the outskirts of town, all thanks to some very literal zoning laws. Ah, zoning laws, those medieval mandates that ensured your tannery was as far from the castle as you could get, while still technically being part of the village. The reason, the smell, of course. Your aromatic enterprise wasn't exactly compatible with the delicate noses of the nobility, or, frankly, anyone not knee-deep in the process. Town councils deemed your operation an olfactory offense, so you found yourself working on the fringes, where the air was as thick with stench as it was with mosquitoes. Distance was the medieval solution to pollution, and your tannery was the poster child for civic planning. This wasn't just about keeping the town squares smelling like roses. It was also about public health. Tanning was a hazardous business. You dealt with lime that could peel the skin off your hands faster than a medieval barber's razor. And then there were the delightful pits of dog dung and urine, breeding grounds for all sorts of germs and diseases. A tanner's health was tougher to maintain than a knight's honor. If you made it past 30 without losing a limb or your sense of smell, you were practically a legend. Despite the stench and the social sidelining, tanners were a community unto themselves. Imagine a guild meeting where the agenda wasn't just about membership dues, but the best sources for the freshest dog dung. Romanticizing the Middle Ages often means imagining these guilds as noble assemblies of skilled artisans. In reality, they were as much about survival as they were about skill. These gatherings were your social network, your professional development, and your neighborhood watch all rolled into one. You had to stick together because, frankly, no one else was going to stick with you. Now, let's take a step back and examine the economic landscape you were part of. You might have been positioned on the lower rungs of the social ladder, but your work was at the very core of medieval commerce. The demand for leather was insatiable. Everyone needed it, from the humblest peasant needing shoes to the most pompous knight requiring armor. Yet, the profits rarely trickled down to you. Instead, the wealth flowed through the merchants and guilds who controlled the trade routes and markets. Think of it as the medieval version of a pyramid scheme, but with the added excitement of potential plague outbreaks. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, your contributions were woven into the very fabric of society. Knights might have ridden into battle with banners flying, but without your leather, they'd be more vulnerable than a hedgehog in a balloon factory. The irony, those same knights, decked in your handiwork, probably wouldn't stop to give you the time of day if you passed them on the street. Unless, of course, you were offering a fresh batch of quality leather, then you might get a nod of acknowledgement. While romantic tales paint the Middle Ages as a time of courtly love and gallant deeds, the reality for a tanner was a bit more grim. Your life was a testament to resilience, a constant battle against the elements, societal disdain, and the very materials you worked with. There was no reward ceremony, no applause from the masses. Just another day, another hide, and another step in a journey that few recognized, but all relied upon. Despite the hardships, there was a certain pride in knowing that your leather was the unsung hero of countless medieval stories. From the pages of epic tales bound in the leather you crafted to the sturdy saddles that carried messages across kingdoms, your work was the silent backbone of history. Without it, the romanticized Middle Ages would be a much different story, one where knights tripped over flimsy armor and books fell apart at the seams. So, while you may not have been invited to the royal feast or recognized in the annals of history, your legacy was etched in every piece of leather that passed through your hands. And in a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's boots or the protection of one's armor, that legacy was as durable as the leather itself. You were part of a hidden army of craftsmen, quietly turning the raw and rugged into the refined and indispensable. And in doing so, you helped shape an era that continues to captivate our imaginations, even if the reality was less about chivalry and more about the daily grind. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the heroics of medieval leatherwork just yet. Sure, as a tanner, you were the unsung craftsman, but the broader economic and political landscape was a different beast altogether. You see, leather wasn't just a material. It was the lifeblood of medieval military campaigns. An army's effectiveness was as much about logistics as it was about swordplay. And what did they need? Leather, leather, and more leather. From the soles of marching boots to the straps on a knight's helmet, your work was literally holding the medieval world together. And yet, despite this indispensable demand, the tanner didn't exactly rise to the top of the social ladder. You might have thought that supplying the military with essential gear would earn you a seat at the Lord's table, but alas, the reality was far more humdrum. The military demand for leather was steadily increasing, especially during the 100 Years' War, which kicked off in 1337. England and France were at each other's throats, and armies marched across muddy fields that would have swallowed lesser boots whole. But thanks to tanners like you, those boots stayed firm, even if your social status did not. Let's dive into the economics a bit. Demand for leather soared, but so did the costs associated with production. You see, tanning wasn't a cheap endeavor. Oak bark, essential for the tanning pits, was sourced at a premium, and transporting it, well, that could cost you a pretty penny, or rather, several pence, enough to eat into whatever meager profits you were hoping to glean. The supply chain was a medieval maze, and you were often stuck negotiating with merchants who could smell desperation as easily as they could smell your tannery. The guild system was meant to be your saving grace, or at least, that was the theory. Guilds controlled the trade, set the standards, and ensured that the tanning process maintained its integrity. They were like the medieval version of a quality assurance department, but with a lot more shouting and a fair amount of ale. You paid your dues, adhered to regulations, and hoped the collective might of the guild would shield you from economic downturns. But guilds were also gatekeepers, and entry wasn't guaranteed. If you were in, you had access to resources and a network of fellow tanners. If you were out, you were on your own, scrapping for survival. The guilds weren't just about leather, though. They were about power, political and economic. By the 14th century, guilds had significant influence in city councils, and they used it to secure favorable laws and taxes. But this influence didn't always trickle down to the individual tanner. In fact, guilds sometimes reinforced social hierarchies, maintaining the status quo rather than challenging it. You were as likely to find social mobility in a guild as you were to find a diamond in your tanning pit. Yet, despite the challenges, the guilds provided a semblance of community. It was a place to share trade secrets, gripe about the latest price of lime, and perhaps even learn a new technique or two. The camaraderie didn't erase the stench or the hazards, but it made the load a little lighter. Plus, there was always the guild feast, where you could momentarily forget your troubles in a haze of roast meats and weak ale. But let's not forget the real political players in this game, the kings and lords who depended on your work but never acknowledged you. Leather was crucial for their armies, but did that mean they treated tanners with any respect? Not a chance. Your role was as invisible as it was vital. While knights paraded in your leather creations, you toiled in obscurity, the medieval version of an unsung hero. Yet the political landscape was shifting. The Black Death struck in the mid-14th century, decimating populations and altering the labor market. Suddenly, craftsmen like you were in higher demand, and wages began to rise, if only slightly. But this was a double-edged sword. The guilds tightened their grip, restricting membership even further to maintain control and keep profits high for those already in. It was a time of opportunity and constraint, a paradox that defined much of medieval life. In the grand scheme of things, your efforts were both monumental and minuscule. You were a cog in a machine that spanned continents, powering economies and armies. Yet, you were also just a human, trying to make it through another day without succumbing to the hazards of your trade or the indifference of society. So, as armies clashed and kings plotted, you were there in the background, quietly ensuring that their ambitions didn't literally fall apart at the seams. Your leather was the unsung material of conquest and survival, a testament to human ingenuity and endurance. And while history may not remember your name, it certainly remembers your work, woven into the very fabric of the medieval world. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that the story of the tanner is far from over. There's still more to uncover about the hidden dynamics of this essential yet undervalued profession. So, stay tuned for the next part, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of medieval tanning and the surprising twists it holds. So, as we embark on this final leg of our medieval tanning tour, let's shatter some of those rose-tinted spectacles and get into the nitty-gritty, literally and figuratively. Medieval life often gets painted as a tapestry of knights, castles, and courtly love. But while some folks were busy swooning over troubadours, others were knee-deep in, well, let's just say the less glamorous side of history. First off, let's address the myth that medieval professions were all about craftsmanship and artistry. Sure, a blacksmith's hammer hitting an anvil might sound like a symphony to some, but let's not romanticize the plight of the tanner. Your average day involved handling more waste products than a modern sewage plant, and the aroma was enough to make even the toughest medieval warrior weep. The truth is, tanners were the sanitation workers of their time, transforming refuse into resources, an unsung role that kept medieval society marching forward, one rancid hide at a time. Now, while your senses were under constant assault, your economic impact was anything but negligible. The tanning trade helped lay the groundwork for what would eventually become the modern leather industry. Fast forward to today, and we're looking at a global market worth over $400 billion. That's a long way from the few shillings you might have pocketed in medieval England. It's a bit like being the ancestor of a tech mogul. Your struggles paved the way for someone else's yard. Not exactly fair, but history's rarely kind to its pioneers. And while we're on the topic of economic impact, let's not gloss over the environmental consequences. Those tanning pits we've been talking about were medieval pollution powerhouses. The waste disposal methods were, shall we say, rustic. The runoff from these pits often made its way into local waterways, proving that environmental concerns aren't just a modern-day dilemma. So, while you were busy revolutionizing the leather game, you were also contributing to a long-standing tradition of environmental headaches. But here's a fun twist for you. The byproducts of tanning were sometimes repurposed. In an age where nothing went to waste, you'll find that those oak bark residues sometimes found new life as a rudimentary form of fertilizer. It's a bit like today's composting, but with an added medieval flair. So while you were inadvertently polluting, you were also recycling. Medieval life was full of contradictions, proving once again that it was less knight in shining armor and more tanner in mucky boots. Let's tackle another myth, that medieval jobs were somehow less stressful than those of today. Picture this. You're a tanner on the outskirts of town, battling not just the smell, but also the persistent threat of disease. Cholera, dysentery, and a host of other delightful ailments were constant companions. And without modern medicine, a simple infection could be a death sentence. Talk about workplace hazards. OSHA would have had a field day with this one. Now, if you think the medieval world had a monopoly on stink, think again. The legacy of the tanner's trade didn't just fade into the annals of history. The techniques developed in those malodorous pits formed the basis of leather production methods that evolved over centuries. Modern tanneries might lack the pungent charm of their medieval counterparts, but they owe a significant debt to those early innovators who dared to wade through muck and mire. And here's a little gallows humor to wrap things up. While being a tanner might have been the pits, pun fully intended, it was a job that ensured you'd always have a place in history's olfactory hall of fame. Your work didn't just stink, it stank with purpose. It laid the foundations for industries that would eventually touch every corner of the globe. So, while you may not have had the social standing of a knight or the wealth of a merchant, you were part of a legacy that outlived them all. In the end, the life of a medieval tanner serves as a potent reminder that the glamorous stories of history are often supported by the unglamorous realities of those who did the heavy lifting. Behind every noble deed and every shining suit of armor, there was someone like you, turning raw hides into shields against the world. Your contributions might not have been celebrated with fanfare, but they were etched into the very fabric of civilization. So, as we close the book on this chapter of history, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the tanners. those unsung heroes with the thankless job of transforming the mundane into the magnificent. And next time you slip on a pair of leather shoes, or admire the craftsmanship of a leather-bound book, spare a thought for those medieval artisans whose legacy, though often overlooked, has certainly stood the test of time. In the dim glow of ancient Greece, where guards and muses commingled like rowdy guests at an eternal banquet, Sappho's voice emerged from the island of Lesbos, an unexpected siren call that resonated across the ages. Born in the 6th century BCE, Sappho was the OG of lyric poetry, a cultural icon whose influence stretched far beyond the sun-drenched shores of her Aegean home. Yet for all her fame, trying to piece together her life is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and a few swapped for a different game entirely. Let's start with the basics. Sappho hailed from Lesbos, an island that's about 214 kilometers around and could fit comfortably into a modern-day Greek tourist's itinerary. But back then, it was less about the picturesque views and more about being a hub of culture and commerce. A place where, if you were lucky, your poetic musings might just get you a spot in the history books, or at least a footnote. Now, Sappho's life is shrouded in more mystery than a celebrity's secret wedding. We know she was born around 630 BCE, but beyond that, the details are sketchier than a hastily drawn ancient map. She was said to have been exiled to Sicily at one point, possibly due to some political shenanigans involving her aristocratic family. But honestly, who hasn't had a little family drama spill onto the public stage? In any case, she eventually returned to Lesbos, where she continued to write and teach. Her writing. Sappho's poetry was like the Spotify of her day, with verses that captured the full spectrum of human emotion. She wrote about love, longing, and jealousy with such clarity and depth that it still hits home today. Take, for instance, the famous fragment where she describes the debilitating effects of love. He seems to me equal to guards that man who sits opposite you and listens close to your sweet speaking. It's like she invented the slow burn romantic subplot way before Hollywood caught on. The scandalous part. Sappho's poetry often centered on her feelings for other women. In fact, her name and home island became so synonymous with female same-sex desire that lesbian eventually took on a whole new meaning. But before we get too ahead of ourselves with modern labels, it's important to remember that ancient Greek society had a very different view of sexuality. Sappho's relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between, were just part of a rich tapestry of human connection that she wove with words. Now, why was Sappho so influential? For one, she pioneered the use of personal voice in poetry. While the epic poets like Homer were busy chronicling the exploits of heroes and guards, Sappho zoomed in on the intimate and personal, crafting verses that spoke directly to the heart. This was revolutionary, folks. Her style offered a counterpoint to the grand narratives of the time, a whisper amidst the heroic shouts. But here's the kicker. Despite her monumental impact, only around 650 lines of her poetry survive today. That's less than the average length of a single Taylor Swift song, give or take a few choruses. What we do have are tantalizing fragments, pieced together from quotations by letter writers or papyrus scraps found in the Egyptian desert. Each line we have is like a relic, precious and incomplete, yet bursting with the fire of its original creation. Sappho was writing in Aeolic Greek, a dialect that might sound like a foreign language even to your average ancient Athenian. Yet her work transcended linguistic barriers, influencing later poets across the Greek world. She was frequently referred to as the 10th Muse, a title that suggests she was considered not just a poet, but a near-divine source of inspiration. Her influence didn't stop at poetry, either. Sappho's work was considered essential reading in classical education systems. That's right, she was like the Shakespeare of ancient Greece, minus the iambic pentameter and Elizabethan ruffs. Her verses were studied, memorized, and emulated by poets and lovers alike. Yet, despite her revered status, Sappho was not immune to the whims of history. During the early Christian era, her works were targeted for destruction, possibly because they didn't quite align with the prevailing moral compass. It's a testament to her enduring power that even this couldn't erase her from cultural memory. So, what do we make of Sappho today? She's a figure wrapped in enigma, a woman who wrote with such potency that her words still echo thousands of years later. Her life and work remind us that history is not just about the grandiose, but also the personal, the intimate, the human. She was a pioneer who dared to let her voice be heard, and in doing so, she changed the course of literature forever. In the end, Sappho might just be the ultimate historical paradox, a legend both elusive and everlasting. Now, let's shift our focus to the backdrop of Sappho's poetic escapades, the bustling, briny world of ancient Lesbos. Picture an island that was more than just a picturesque dart on the Aegean map. It was a veritable hive of economic and cultural activity. Lesbos was famous for its olive oil, a liquid gold that lubricated not just salads, but also the wheels of commerce. This wasn't your standard supermarket variety. We're talking about the premium stuff, the kind that might even inspire a sonnet or two. In the 6th century BCE, when Sappho was crafting her verses, Lesbos was a significant player in the olive oil trade, exporting jars of this precious commodity across the Mediterranean. Picture amphorae, those iconic, two-handled vases, filled with olive oil being loaded onto ships bound for ports as far-flung as Egypt and Italy. It wasn't just the oil itself that was valuable. The trade routes it traveled on were arteries of cultural exchange, bringing in new ideas, stories, and perhaps even the odd exotic spice or two. This was a world where commerce and culture were as intertwined as the olive branches that shaded the island's groves. But it wasn't all sunshine and amphorae. The politics of Lesbos could be as slippery as, well, olive oil on a marble floor. The island was divided into several city-states, each with its own ruling elite. Myrilene, where Sappho spent much of her life, was the island's powerhouse. It was a place of political intrigue, where alliances were as fluid as the Aegean tides. It's no wonder that Sappho's family, part of the aristocratic class, found themselves entangled in the occasional political upheaval. Exile to Sicily. Just another day in the life of an ancient Greek aristocrat. But let's not pretend that Sappho was just a passive observer of her times. Her poetry suggests a keen awareness of the social and political currents swirling around her. She lived in a male-dominated society where women were often relegated to the domestic sphere, yet she carved out a space for herself as a respected poet and teacher. How did she manage this? Sure, talent played a big role, but perhaps there was a bit of savvy networking involved too. Think of it as ancient social media. She was known to associate with the intellectual elite of her time, and her poetry often reflects themes of friendship and mentorship, suggesting she was deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of her society. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. How did a woman in ancient Greece, a society not exactly known for gender equality, make such a name for herself? It's a question that's as tantalizing as Sappho's surviving verses. While we can't discount her poetic genius, it's likely there were other factors at play. Wealth and social standing certainly helped. Sappho came from a well-to-do family, which afforded her the education and resources to pursue her craft. And let's not forget the possible patronage of powerful figures who recognized her talent. Yet, there's an irony here that's hard to ignore. While Sappho's society placed considerable restrictions on women, it also revered the muses, female figures of inspiration. Perhaps this cultural paradox provided Sappho with a unique niche. She wasn't just a poet, she was a cultural icon, an embodiment of the muse herself. Her ability to capture the nuances of love and human emotion transcended the societal norms of her time, allowing her to slip through the cracks of a rigid system and emerge as a voice that echoed across the ages. Sappho's poetry also gives us a glimpse into the daily life of ancient Lesbos. Her verses are sprinkled with references to the natural beauty of the island, its flowers, its sea, its starry nights. These aren't just poetic flourishes. They reflect the very real environment that shaped her and her work. Living on Lesbos meant being constantly surrounded by the sea, with its promise of travel and trade, its whispers of distant lands. It's easy to imagine how such a setting could inspire a poet to ponder the vastness of human experience. And speaking of vastness, let's not forget the educational environment of the time. While women in ancient Greece were generally not given the same educational opportunities as men, Lesbos was something of an anomaly. It was home to a number of intellectuals and poets, creating an atmosphere where learning and poetic expression were highly valued. Sappho herself is said to have run a thyasos, a sort of informal school or gathering, where young women were taught music, poetry, and the arts of love and beauty. This was not just about imparting skills. It was about creating a community of like-minded individuals who could express themselves freely, a kind of ancient feminist collective. So, what does all this tell us about Sappho's world? It was a place of contradictions and complexities, a society that, despite its limitations, allowed a woman to rise to prominence through her art. Her life and work remind us that history is full of surprises, and that sometimes the most compelling stories are those that defy the norms. Sappho's legend is both a testament to her extraordinary talent and a reflection of the rich, multifaceted world in which she lived. As we delve deeper into the fabric of her society, we'll continue to uncover the threads that connected her life to the broader tapestry of ancient Greece. The economy, politics, and culture of her time were not just the backdrop to her story. They were integral to understanding how she became the voice of a generation, and why that voice still resonates today. Stay tuned as we further explore this enigmatic figure and the world that shaped her into the mythic poet we celebrate. As we peel back the layers of Sappho's mythos, we find ourselves in the foggy terrain where fact meets fiction, a place as slippery as an olive oil amphora on a storm-tossed ship. The romanticized image of Sappho, the swooning, lovelorn poetess who taught an exclusive school for women, has been lovingly crafted by admirers over centuries. But hold onto your togas, folks, because it's time to sift the historical truth from the poetic embellishments. First, on the chopping block, is the idea that Sappho operated a formal school for women on Lesbos, a kind of ancient Hogwarts for poetic prodigies. The notion is tantalizing, isn't it? A utopia where young women gathered to learn the arts of love and lyricism under the tutelage of Sappho herself. But let's pump the brakes here. While Sappho did indeed engage with young women, teaching them poetry and music, there's scant evidence she ran an official institution. Instead, picture something more akin to a salon, a vibrant social circle where intellects mingled like olives in a Greek salad. It's possible that this romantic vision of a school was amplified by later writers, who were more than a little enchanted by the idea of Sappho as a proto-feminist icon. After all, what better way to elevate her status than to cast her as an educator of women in a world dominated by men? But in reality, her gatherings were likely informal, bound less by academic structure and more by the shared pursuit of artistic expression and personal growth. Next, there's the matter of Sappho's supposed perpetual heartache. Popular imagination loves to paint her as the eternal forlorn lover, pining under a moonlit sky, quill in hand, composing odes to unrequited love. But this is an oversimplification, if not a downright disservice. Sure, her poetry is saturated with the raw emotion of love and loss, but to reduce her to just a heartbroken bard is to miss the broader strokes of her genius. Sappho's poetry transcends mere romantic woes. Her work is a rich tapestry of human experience, full of social commentary and keen observations on the intricacies of relationships and power dynamics. She was more than just a poet of passion. She was a shrewd commentator on the human condition, a voice that spoke not only of love, but of the societal structures that governed it. Consider the economic and political landscape of Lesbos, a place where commerce and culture were as intertwined as the laurel wreaths crowning its poets. Sappho's world was one of shifting alliances and political machinations, all of which subtly seeped into her work. Her poems hint at the underlying tensions of her society, capturing the intersections of personal and public life with a nuance that's as relevant today as it was millennia ago. In this way, Sappho was not just a lyricist, but a cultural critic, wielding her words like a sculptor's chisel to carve out truths about the human experience. And let's not forget the myth of Sappho's tragic leap from the cliffs of Leucas, a tale as dramatic as a Greek tragedy itself. Spoiler alert. This story is likely nothing more than a poetic invention, a tale spun from the threads of her own lines and inflated by later writers who couldn't resist adding a dash of melodrama to her legend. There's no solid historical evidence to suggest she took such a plunge. It's a classic case of the mythic overshadowing the mundane reality, a woman who lived, loved, and wrote rather than leapt. The fascination with Sappho's supposed suicide speaks volumes about how her image was manipulated to fit a narrative of doomed romance. It's almost as if later generations, unable to grasp the full spectrum of her genius, needed to encapsulate her life in a single sensational story. But the reality is far more compelling. Sappho lived a full life, rich with creativity and influence, her legacy not tied to a single dramatic act, but to the enduring power of her words. So, what do we take away from all this myth-busting? It's clear that Sappho was a complex figure, far removed from the simplistic caricatures that later audiences, eager for romance and tragedy, imposed upon her. Her life was one of intellect and influence, a testament to her ability to navigate the intricacies of her time with both sensitivity and savvy. In the end, Sappho's legend serves as a reminder that history is often as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. The myths surrounding her, while captivating, are just that, myths. The real Sappho was a woman of depth and dimension, a poet whose work continues to resonate because it captures the timeless truths of the human heart. As we delve further into Sappho's world, we'll continue to explore how her reality, grounded in the gritty details of ancient life, gave rise to a legacy that transcends the ages. Stay tuned as we unravel more of her story, peeling back the layers of legend to reveal the remarkable woman beneath. And speaking of peeling back layers, let's dive into the strange and winding journey of Sappho's legacy through history, a tale as convoluted as a Greek labyrinth and just as intriguing. You see, Sappho's poetry didn't just survive the ages, it practically performed acrobatics to do so. Imagine her verses as a well-traveled suitcase, bouncing through the turbulent centuries, somehow avoiding the fate of becoming ancient confetti. First, let's tackle the ancient world, where Sappho was the literary equivalent of a rock star. Her work was cherished, memorized, and even put to music. Ancient Spartify, anyone. By the time of Plato, around 400 BCE, she was already enshrined as a 10th muse, a title suggesting she was more than mortal, a lyrical deity in her own right. But as empires rose and fell, the sands of time proved less than kind to her oeuvre. Fast forward to the Roman era, where Sappho's reputation got a bit of a renaissance. Before the actual Renaissance, mind you, Roman poets like Catullus and Ovid were singing her praises, albeit in Latin. Catullus, who lived in the 1st century BCE, even crafted his own love poems in a style reminiscent of Sappho's emotional depth. It's like he was trying to catch her lyrical lightning in a Roman bottle. But here's the catch. While her influence was pervasive, the actual physical copies of her work, scarcer than hen's teeth. The Middle Ages were not exactly a golden age for Sappho's verses. As Christianity swept through Europe with all the subtlety of a marching legion, her works were often considered too, shall we say, spicy for the new moral order. Medieval monks, those gatekeepers of knowledge, were more likely to copy the Bible than Sappho's passionate musings. In fact, many of her works were probably viewed with the kind of suspicion you'd reserve for a suspiciously friendly Trojan horse. Yet, despite the odds, whispers of Sappho's genius persisted. Manuscripts were copied in the Byzantine Empire and occasionally made their way into the libraries of the educated elite, who were perhaps intrigued by her forbidden allure. But let's face it, they were more likely to be found discussing the merits of Augustine than Sappho at the dinner table. Here's where it gets downright bizarre. When the Renaissance rolled around, Sappho's name resurfaced like an ancient shipwreck newly revealed by the shifting tides. Renaissance humanists, those intellectual magpies, were rediscovering classical texts with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy shop. Petrarch, Boccaccio, and their ilk were all about digging up the past, and Sappho was one of their glittering finds. By the 16th century, Sappho was undergoing a cultural makeover, reimagined as both a tragic lover and a proto-feminist icon. This duality, artistic genius and scandalous love, fueled her mythos. The printing press, that revolutionary contraption, helped spread her fragments like wildfire. Yet the actual content of her work remained elusive, often reconstructed from quotes in other texts, like patching together a quilt from scraps. The irony of history, of course, is that while Sappho's poetry was often censored or sanitized, her legend only grew. By the time you hit the Enlightenment, she was both a subject of scholarly study and a symbol of romantic rebellion, a muse for both the rationalists and the romantics. Talk about having your cake and eating it too. And let's not gloss over the economic factors that played a role in this journey. The cost of producing books before the printing press was astronomical, akin to purchasing a modern-day luxury car. Only the wealthy could afford such luxuries, and so the survival of any text was often at the mercy of its popularity among the elite. In this context, the fact that any of Sappho's work survived is nothing short of miraculous. But why, you might ask, did Sappho endure when so many of her contemporaries faded into obscurity? Perhaps it's because her poetry doesn't just speak to the mind, but to the heart. Her verses capture the essence of love and longing with such clarity that they transcend the dusty annals of history. They resonate because they touch on universal truths, on emotions that remain as raw and real today as they were millennia ago. In a way, Sappho's journey through history is a testament to the power of art to endure against all odds. Her poetry, though fragmented, continues to inspire because it captures the messy, beautiful complexity of being human. And as we continue to explore her legacy, we find that her story is not just about survival, but about transformation. How each generation has reinterpreted her work, found new meaning, and kept her spirit alive. So, what's the takeaway from this historical odyssey? Perhaps it's that the true measure of a legacy isn't how much of it survives in physical form, but how deeply it continues to touch the human soul. Sappho's poetry may exist mostly in fragments, but her impact is whole, a testament to the enduring power of words to transcend time and space. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Sappho's saga, let's keep our minds open to the myriad ways her voice continues to echo through the ages. Whether as a muse, a scandal, or a feminist icon, Sappho remains a beacon of artistic genius, a symbol of the timeless struggle to express the inexpressible. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. And here we are, standing at the crossroads of Sappho's ancient legacy and her vibrant modern-day influence. It's a journey that spans over 2.5 millennia and still, somehow, feels as fresh as a sea breeze over the Aegean. You see, Sappho didn't just leave behind fragments of poetry. She left a cultural footprint so deep that even the sands of time couldn't wash it away. Let's talk about her role as an LGBTQ icon. Sappho's verses about love and desire for women weren't just whispered secrets. They were bold declarations that challenged the norms of her time. In the 6th century BCE, such expressions were groundbreaking, akin to planting a rainbow flag on the rocky shores of Lesbos. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and Sappho's name became synonymous with female same-sex love. Her work inspired literary giants like Virginia Woolf, who saw in Sappho a kindred spirit, a woman forging her own path in a man's world. Woolf once imagined Sappho as riding with a pen dipped in the blackest ink, a nod to the intensity and passion she brought to her work. Sappho's influence didn't stop at literature. It spilled over into music and art, where her spirit continues to inspire. The 20th century saw musicians like Leonard Cohen name-dropping her in songs, while contemporary artists have reimagined her in visual art and performance. It's as if every note, every brushstroke is an attempt to capture the essence of her lyrical genius, a testament to her role as an eternal muse. In a world where pop culture moves faster than a Greek chariot, the fact that Sappho's influence remains relevant speaks volumes. Now, let's pivot to her impact on feminist thought. Sappho was not just a poet. She was a trailblazer, a woman who dared to speak her truth in a society that preferred women to remain silent. Her work provided a template for later generations of women writers, who saw in her a model of artistic and personal independence. In the 1970s, the feminist movement found a powerful figurehead in Sappho, a woman who had lived centuries earlier, but whose work resonated with the fight for gender equality. Her poetry, with its raw emotion and personal perspective, was a rallying cry for women seeking to assert their voices in a patriarchal world. But let's not get too carried away with romanticized visions of Sappho as a crusader for women's rights. While her work has been embraced by feminists, it's essential to remember that she was a product of her time. Her poetry reflects the complexities of her society, where women had limited rights, but could wield influence in more subtle, nuanced ways. Sappho's legacy as a feminist icon is as much about how she has been interpreted and reimagined through the ages as it is about her original intentions. And here's a fun twist of fate. Sappho's fragmented poems have become a modern metaphor for the fragmented nature of identity itself. Her incomplete works, much like the self, are subject to interpretation, reconstruction, and endless debate. It's a fitting legacy for a poet who thrived on nuance and complexity, who understood that the human experience is never a finished product, but an evolving narrative. As we draw this historical journey to a close, let's reflect on what Sappho's enduring influence tells us about legacy and significance. Her life and work are reminders that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of stories, some told, some untold, and some waiting to be discovered. Sappho's story, with all its gaps and mysteries, invites us to question, to explore, and to find meaning in the spaces between. Her legacy is a testament to the power of art to transcend its time and place, to speak to the core of what it means to be human. In a world where cultures clash and societies evolve, Sappho's voice remains a constant, a reminder that some things, like the beauty of a well-crafted poem, never go out of style. So there you have it. Sappho, the ancient poet whose words have rippled through time, shaping cultures, inspiring movements, and reminding us that the heart's desires are as old as time itself. Her story is a rich tapestry of love, longing, and legacy, a testament to the enduring power of words to capture the human soul. And as we turn the page on this exploration of Sappho's life and influence, let's carry with us the knowledge that history, much like poetry, is an art form, a never-ending quest to understand the past, and in doing so, illuminate the present. The sun's barely brushed the horizon, and you're already knee-deep in the dirt, wrangling a field with tools that are, well, not exactly cutting-edge. It's the 6th century BC in Persia, and you're a farmer, part of an empire that's the size of a small continent. Your day is about hard work, sweat, and the occasional existential wondering if maybe that merchant gig in Susa would have been less back-breaking. First off, let's talk about your trusty tools. You've got a wooden plough, a bit like the one your great-great-grandfather used, pulled by a pair of oxen that are as temperamental as the weather. It's no John Deere tractor, but it gets the job done, most days. When your plough isn't sinking into the mud or hitting a rock, you're using a hand sickle to harvest barley, your bread and butter. Literally. Barley is the go-to crop, not just because it's hardy and doesn't throw a tantrum in bad weather, but because it's the currency of the land. Forget coins with fancy king faces. Here, barley is king. You and your neighbors use it to pay taxes, trade for goods, and sometimes even settle debts. A solid bushel of barley will get you a decent amount of dates, or maybe a jug of wine if you're looking to unwind after a day of sunburn and sore muscles. And speaking of trade, welcome to the barter system, where every trade feels like an episode of a haggling reality show. Want that new set of sandals? Better hope your neighbor needs some barley or whatever else you can spare. It's a system that works just fine until you realize you need something nobody wants to trade for, like that time you tried to swap a goat for a bronze dagger. Spoiler, it didn't go well. Now, let's not forget the economic backbone of your operation, your family. It's all hands on deck, from your youngest son, who's barely taller than a stalk of grain, to your elderly mother who insists on supervising everything. Farming is a family affair, and everyone pulls their weight, or at least that's the plan. The kids might get distracted by, being kids, and the elders have more advice than energy, but together you make it work. Mostly. Family labor isn't just about getting the job done, it's about survival. With Persia's vastness comes unpredictability, whether it's a drought or a taxman who's had one too many and thinks you owe more than you do. It's a world where having a strong family unit means you've got a fighting chance against whatever the gods throw your way. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is, life's tough, and you spend more time worrying about the next crop yield than basking in the glory of empire. The Persian Empire might be rolling in riches, thanks to its size and the brilliance of rulers like Cyrus the Great, but that doesn't always trickle down to the likes of you. You're out here cracking jokes with the neighbors about how great it would be if barley were gold. Spoiler alert, it's not. So you plow and you plant, you harvest and you haggle. You're part of a vast, complex web of trade and economy that stretches from the mountains of Media to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. It's a system that's as fragile as your wooden plow and as stubborn as that one ox that refuses to move. And there you are, a small cog in this grand machine, pushing through the dirt and dreaming of a good harvest. Because in the end, it's all about the barley. that golden grain that keeps the empire moving, one field at a time. In your world, the sun rises and sets on the rhythm of the land, and you're right there with it, sowing the seeds of tomorrow's empire, one stubborn furrow at a time. Still with me as we wade through the golden fields of the Persian Empire? Good, because it's time to dig deeper into the empire's pecking order, where you, dear farmer, stand like a sturdy but unadorned pillar in a grand, opulent palace. We're talking about a social hierarchy that's as layered as the baklava you wish you could afford more often. Let's start at the top of this societal pyramid with the king, a title held by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC. He's not just any ruler, he's a ruler with a capital R, the kind who can expand his empire like you'd expand a vegetable patch, except he uses armies, not shovels. Below him are the satraps, the empire's regional governors, who make sure the king's will is done and his coffers are full. Think of them as middle managers with armies and a penchant for tax collection. Now, you might be wondering where you fit into all this. Well, my friend, you're firmly rooted in the laborer class, the backbone of the empire's agricultural machine. While the nobility and military enjoy the spoils of conquest, you're the one actually growing the food that keeps them fed. It's a bit like being the unsung hero of a blockbuster movie, essential, yet forever off-screen. But let's not gloss over the fact that your contribution, while vital, comes with its own set of headaches. Taxes, for instance, are as constant as the sunrise. The empire has an insatiable appetite for resources, and guess who's footing that bill? That's right, you and your barley. Taxes in the Achaemenid Empire were often paid in kind, meaning the fruits or grains of your labor went directly to the state. The tax rate could be as high as 20%, which, if you're keeping track, is a hefty chunk of your crop. You're not just paying for the king's lavish lifestyle, either. Those taxes fund an empire-spanning network of roads, palaces, and an army that's as sprawling as it is formidable. It's a system that keeps the wheels of the empire turning while keeping you tethered to the land. And let's not pretend you're thrilled about it. But hey, it's not like you can just up and move to a tax-free paradise. And don't get me started on tributes. Depending on where exactly in the empire you're tilling soil, you might owe additional tributes to your local satrap. Imagine taxes on top of taxes, like a bureaucratic layer cake of financial burdens. The empire's expansion means more mouths to feed and more troops to supply, making your role more crucial and pressured than ever. Now, let's pivot to the society around you. The Achaemenid Empire, famous for its tolerance under Cyrus, encourages a mix of cultures, languages, and religions. This diversity is like a colorful tapestry, and while it sounds romantic, it also means navigating a complex web of social norms and expectations. It's like living in a bustling bazaar where everyone speaks a different dialect, and you're just trying to sell your barley at a fair price. You're part of a community that's a melting pot of traditions, but let's not romanticize this as some utopian dream. The reality involves plenty of friction. You might be sharing irrigation canals with neighbors who have different customs and guards, leading to the occasional squabble over water rights or festival dates. But these interactions also foster a sense of resilience and adaptability, survival traits in an empire as vast and varied as Persia. Amidst all this, the politics of the empire are as tangled as a sheep's wool. Policies and decrees rain down from the top, often without much regard for the little guy sweating it out on the ground. You hear about decisions made in distant palaces that ripple out to your fields, like when Darius the Great later introduces standardized coins, a boon for trade, but a headache for those still bartering with barley. And let's not forget the military, an ever-present force in the empire's expansion. While you might not be a soldier, the demands of war trickle down to you. Those armies need food, and guess who's expected to provide it? The pressure to produce and supply can be relentless, especially when the empire is in the throes of conquest. So, as you plant and harvest, you're not just feeding your family, you're fueling a vast imperial machine. It's a role that can feel both empowering and oppressive, a duality that defines your life as a Persian farmer. You're a linchpin in a colossal empire that stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indus, yet you remain rooted to the soil, a testament to the enduring power of agriculture in an ever-expanding world. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through your everyday life, remember this. While you may not wear a crown or command an army, your role in this empire is as vital as any king or general. You are the quiet force that powers a civilization, the unsung hero in a saga of conquests and culture. And though the barley may not be gold, your contribution is worth its weight in history. Stick around, because there's so much more to uncover in the labyrinth of Persian life. Speaking of historical legends versus the gritty reality, let's dive into the environmental challenges that ancient Persian farmers faced. If you thought today's weather forecasts were unreliable, try guessing the climate patterns of 6th century BC Persia, armed only with the wisdom of the village elder and some questionable omens. Your life as a farmer is essentially a game of climatic roulette, with droughts and floods spinning the wheel. The Persian landscape, vast and varied, offers every kind of challenge Mother Nature can throw at you. From the arid deserts of the Central Plateau to the lush regions near the Caspian Sea, geography dictates your farming techniques as much as any imperial decree. If you're farming near the Zagros Mountains, you're likely dealing with rugged terrain and unpredictable weather, while those in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia have to worry about the Euphrates and Tigris rivers overflowing their banks faster than you can say sandbag. But hey, necessity is the mother of invention, and Persian farmers have an ace up their sleeve, the Qanat. This ingenious irrigation system, essentially an underground aqueduct, allows you to tap into distant water sources and channel them directly to your fields. Picture this: a sloping tunnel dug into the earth, bringing that precious H2O from the mountains to your parched crops. It's not just a marvel of ancient engineering, it's your lifeline. Constructing Qanats is no small feat. It's like building a subway system with nothing but hand tools and determination. These tunnels can stretch for miles, with vertical shafts dug at intervals to access the water flow. The labor is intense, but the payoff is enormous. Reliable water in a region where rainfall can be as unpredictable as a toddler with a sugar high. Some Qanats stretch over 50 kilometers, proving the lengths you'll go to for a good crop. And while we're busting myths, let's address the romantic notion that these ancient systems made farming a breeze. Sure, Qanats are brilliant, but they require constant maintenance. You and your community are perpetually on call, ready to clear blockages or repair collapses. It's an ongoing battle against erosion and sedimentation, not to mention the occasional snake that decides your Qanat is a perfect place for a nap. These challenges are as persistent as a tax collector, but at least you can reason with a snake. Now, let's talk about the geographical diversity of Persia, which is as varied as the excuses you make to avoid a neighbor's party. Empire stretches from the scorching deserts of the Iranian plateau to the lush, green valleys near the Indus River. Each region presents its own set of agricultural challenges and opportunities. In the north, near the Caspian Sea, the climate is relatively mild and wet, a farmer's dream compared to the parched southern deserts where rain is as rare as a day off. In these diverse climates, your choice of crops is crucial. Barley is a staple across the empire due to its resilience, but you might also grow wheat, dates, or pomegranates, depending on your location. The variety of crops reflects the empire's geographical diversity, a testament to the adaptability and resourcefulness of its farmers. But with diversity comes complexity. The Persian Empire's vastness means there's no one-size-fits-all solution to farming. Each region requires its own techniques and knowledge, a tapestry of agricultural practices as rich and varied as the cultures within the empire. The adaptability required is nothing short of impressive, and a reminder that while you might dream of uniformity, true strength lies in diversity. This diversity also means a diverse set of problems. In the southern deserts, you're battling water scarcity, while in the fertile northern valleys, you're contending with pests and soil fertility issues. It's a constant juggling act, and if you drop the ball, well, let's just say the consequences are more dire than a scolding from your mother-in-law. Despite the challenges, farming in ancient Persia is not just about survival. It's about thriving in a complex world where every drop of water, every grain of barley, is part of a larger story. It's about innovation in the face of adversity and the relentless pursuit of a better harvest. You're not just growing crops, you're cultivating resilience, one Qanat and one furrow at a time. As you navigate this landscape of challenges and innovations, it's worth reflecting on why this matters. The story of Persian agriculture is a microcosm of human ingenuity. a testament to our ability to adapt and thrive in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that while the past may seem distant, the struggles and triumphs of these ancient farmers are not so different from our own. So, as you walk the fields, mindful of the kannats beneath your feet and the unpredictable skies above, remember that you are part of a legacy of resilience and innovation. Your story is woven into the very fabric of the Persian Empire, a tapestry of challenges overcome and dreams pursued. And as we continue this journey through history, keep in mind that the lessons of the past are not just relics, they are the seeds of tomorrow's wisdom. Stay tuned, because in this grand saga of empire and agriculture, there's plenty more to uncover. As the sun dips below the horizon and you wipe the sweat from your brow, it's time to debunk a few myths about life on the ancient Persian farmstead. You know, the ones that paint a pastoral paradise where you're leisurely tending crops while singing to the birds. Spoiler alert, reality is less sound of music and more survivor, Persian edition. First up, let's tackle the myth of the idyllic countryside. In the romanticized version, you're one with nature, living off the land in harmony. In the real version, nature's more like that unruly neighbor who refuses to turn down the music. You're constantly battling the elements, from blistering heat to unexpected frost. And while we're talking weather, let's remember disease is lurking around like an uninvited guest at a wedding. Forget modern medicine. This is 6th century BC Persia. Medical knowledge is about as advanced as a wooden wheel. If you're sick, you're relying on a mix of herbal remedies and prayers to the gods. And let's be honest, the gods have a lot on their plate, what with overseeing an empire and all. Plagues can sweep through like a bad rumor, leaving devastation in their wake. It's a roll of the dice every time someone sneezes. Then there's hard labor, a constant companion in your farming life. Romantic notions of leisurely strolls through fields. Yeah, right. You're up before dawn, and the work doesn't stop until long after sunset. Farming isn't just a job. It's a full-body workout that even modern cross-fit enthusiasts would balk at. You're hauling water, tilling soil, and harvesting crops, all with tools that could double as museum pieces. And don't even get me started on pests. Insects, rodents, and other critters are as much a part of your life as the family cow. You're in a perpetual battle to protect your crops, employing every trick in the ancient book. It's like a never-ending war, and sometimes the pests win. Each year, you're at the mercy of not just the weather, but also these tiny invaders. But amidst the muck and toil, there's resilience. You and your fellow farmers are nothing if not resourceful. When faced with a problem, you don't just throw up your hands, you innovate. Consider the ingenious kannat system, which we've already discussed. It's a testament to the creativity and tenacity of Persian farmers. You're not just surviving, you're adapting and thriving in a world that's as unpredictable as a toddler in a candy store. And let's not forget the community. Despite the hardships, there's a strong sense of camaraderie among your fellow farmers. When times are tough, you band together, sharing resources and knowledge. It's a collective effort to push back against the challenges of nature and empire. This social network is as important as any irrigation system, keeping you connected and supported. Now, about that romantic view of pastoral life, there's a reason it persists. It's a comforting notion, the idea that somewhere at some time, life was simpler and purer. But the truth is, even in ancient Persia, life was anything but simple, was complex, challenging, and often harsh. Yet it was also filled with moments of triumph, small victories that kept you going. Consider the satisfaction of a successful harvest. After months of grueling work, seeing the fruits of your labor is nothing short of exhilarating. It's a moment that makes all the hard work worthwhile, a reminder that while life may be tough, it's also rewarding. These moments are what fuel the myth, the idea that amidst the struggle, there's beauty. But let's keep our feet firmly planted in reality. Life as a Persian farmer is a juggling act, balancing between the harsh realities and the occasional glimmers of hope. You're part of a grand empire, yet your world is the land, the crops, and the community around you. It's a life that demands resilience, ingenuity, and a good dose of humor to navigate. So next time you hear tales of pastoral perfection, remember the grit behind the gloss. Life on the Persian farm is as rugged as the landscape itself, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who work the land. It's a story of survival, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of a better life amidst the challenges of an ancient world. And as we continue this journey through history, let's keep uncovering the layers, revealing the truths behind the myths, and celebrating the resilience of those who came before us. There's more to explore in the tapestry of Persian life, so stay tuned as we delve deeper into this ancient empire story. So, as we dive deeper into the annals of Persian agriculture, let's zoom out a bit and take in the grand panorama. We're not just talking about fields of barley or the grit of daily farming life anymore. Oh no, we're looking at how these ancient practices rippled across the empire, influencing not just the neighbors, but echoing through time to shape modern agricultural techniques. Take a moment to appreciate the Persian irrigation system, the Qanat. These marvels of ancient engineering didn't just water the crops, they were the lifeblood of an empire, and they didn't stop at Persia's borders. Neighboring regions, like the arid lands of Arabia and the semi-arid zones of North Africa, took a leaf out of the Persian playbook. These places adopted Qanats, spreading the technique like an ancient viral video, because when you've got a system that works, why reinvent the wheel, or in this case, the water channel? The Qanat system, with its ability to supply water over vast distances without evaporation losses, was nothing short of revolutionary. It allowed settlements to thrive in otherwise uninhabitable areas, laying the groundwork for urbanization in the harshest environments. Even today, you'll find remnants of these systems functioning in Iran, a testament to their enduring design. It's like discovering your ancestors' flip phone still works, and it's got better reception than your smartphone. But the Persian influence didn't stop at irrigation. Their agricultural techniques, trade practices, and even crop choices traveled along the empire's vast network of roads. The Royal Road, stretching over 500 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, was more than just a highway for armies. It was a conduit for cultural exchange. Imagine caravans laden with goods, ideas, and yes, agricultural know-how, crisscrossing the empire like ancient Amazon Prime deliveries. And let's not forget the Persians' impact on crop diversity. By encouraging the cultivation of various crops suited to different climates, they effectively turned their empire into a biological melting pot. This diversity wasn't just about having a varied diet. It was a strategic move to ensure food security. If one crop failed due to bad weather or pests, others could take its place. It's like having multiple backup plans when your main plan involves leaving things to chance. Yes, I'm looking at you, weather forecasts. Now, you might be wondering how this all ties into modern farming. Well, today's agricultural engineers still look back at ancient Persia's techniques for inspiration. The Qanat system, for instance, is a precursor to modern-day sustainable water management practices. In an era when water scarcity is a global concern, these ancient systems remind us that sometimes the best solutions are the tried and true, born out of necessity and ingenuity. So, what's the legacy of the Persian farmer's way of life? Beyond the fields and the wheat, it's about resilience and adaptability. It's about understanding the land and working with it, not against it. In a world where industrial agriculture often prioritizes yield over sustainability, the Persian model offers a refreshing reminder of the value of balance. They knew that the health of the land was inseparably linked to the health of the community. That's a lesson as relevant today as it was 500 years ago. Let's not romanticize the past as some golden age of harmony, because, spoiler alert, every era has its struggles. The Persian farmer dealt with unpredictable weather, oppressive taxes, and the caprices of empire, much like modern farmers grapple with climate change, market volatility, and regulatory pressures. But the spirit of innovation and adaptability remains a constant thread, weaving through the ages like an unbreakable vine. And here's the kicker. While technology has evolved, the fundamental challenges of farming have not. You still need water, fertile soil, and a bit of luck with the weather. You still rely on a community to share knowledge, resources, and support. The tools may look different now, drones and data analytics, instead of wooden plows and sickles, but the essence of farming is timeless. As we wrap up our journey through the fields of ancient Persia, let's take a moment to appreciate the roots of our modern agricultural practices. They're buried deep in the soil of history, nurtured by the hands of countless farmers who toiled under the same sun that sets on us today. The legacy of Persian agriculture is not just in the crops they grew, but in the knowledge they sowed and the resilience they cultivated. In a way, every time you bite into a piece of bread, you're tasting a slice of history, a testament to the ingenuity and perseverance of those ancient farmers. It's a legacy that transcends time, reminding us that while the tools may change, the heart of farming remains the same. So next time you're caught in a drizzle, cursing the heavens and your lack of an umbrella, spare a thought for those ancient Persian farmers. They didn't just survive, they thrived, turning the harsh realities of their world into opportunities. Their story is a reminder that in the dance between humanity and nature, it's not about conquering but coexisting. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. Otto von Bismarck's early life was like a chaotic symphony, a blend of privilege, mischief, and a dash of destiny. Born on April 1, 1815 in Schönhausen, Prussia, a date fitting for history's great trickster, Bismarck was the offspring of a Junker family. Think Prussian aristocrats with a penchant for land, horses, and occasionally political ambition. His father, Ferdinand von Bismarck, was a typical country squire, while his mother, Wilhelmine Mencken, was a city-bred intellectual who might have preferred her son to be more bookish and less of a wild card. Young Otto was not the type you'd peg for future greatness. If you walked past him in his early years, you might have seen a kid more interested in pranks than politics. Academic pursuits, not exactly his forte. He shuffled through various schools, with his usual attitude being a mix of disinterest and disdain. In fact, if academic performance were a race, Bismarck would have been the guy casually strolling at the back, occasionally stopping to tie his shoes or pull a prank on the frontrunners. University life did little to alter this trajectory. Otto was more focused on beer and dueling than lectures and libraries. At the University of Göttingen, he racked up more duels than honors, proudly sporting the battle scars as badges of youthful defiance. It was said he participated in 27 duels in a single year. If there had been a GPA for swordsmanship, he'd have graduated with honors. His academic record, however, was less than stellar, with him eventually leaving Göttingen to continue his studies at the University of Berlin. When he finally finished his education, Bismarck had a law degree but little interest in pursuing a legal career. So how did this rebellious spirit transition from a country squire to the Iron Chancellor? Well, when you're as audacious as Otto, the straight path is rarely the one taken. For a while, he toyed with the idea of becoming a farmer. Picture this: Bismarck strutting around his estate with a swagger more suited to a battlefield than a field of crops. It was during these years of rural idyll that he honed his skills in persuasion and intimidation, often charming or strong-arming his way through local disputes. Farmers don't typically handle negotiations with the gusto of a future political titan, but Bismarck was not your typical farmer. The real pivot came when Bismarck decided to try his hand at politics. In 1847, he entered the political arena as a deputy in the Prussian United Diet, a kind of proto-parliament. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He quickly made a name for himself as a staunch defender of the monarchy. While others whispered about reform, Bismarck bellowed about loyalty to the crown. His speeches were fiery, unapologetic, and often tinged with the kind of sarcasm that would make a modern-day Twitter troll proud. Bismarck's early career was marked by his uncanny ability to read the political winds and adjust his sails accordingly. He was pragmatic to the core, a trait that would serve him well as he maneuvered through the labyrinthine politics of 19th-century Europe. His rise was not without controversy. He was often seen as a reactionary, a label that, while somewhat deserved, didn't fully capture his complexity. Bismarck was less interested in maintaining the status quo than in using it as a stepping stone to something greater. And that something greater was the unification of Germany. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this point, Bismarck was still the young, brash politician with a knack for stirring the pot. He had yet to earn the title of Iron Chancellor, but the seeds of his future dominance were already taking root. His early life, a blend of mischief, intellect, and ambition, hinted at the formidable statesman he would become. Otto von Bismarck was on a path to reshape Europe, but for now, he was just getting started. Otto von Bismarck was on a trajectory that would make the most thrilling roller coaster look like a kiddie ride. As he transitioned from the brash young politician to a veritable force of nature, Europe in the mid-19th century was, to put it mildly, a hot mess. Nationalism was simmering like a pot on the verge of boiling over, and the map of Europe looked like it had been sketched by a toddler with a penchant for chaos. It was in this tempestuous milieu that Bismarck would make his mark, not with a gentle brush, but with a sledgehammer. Bismarck's rise to power was as much about timing as it was about talent. By 1862, he was appointed Prime Minister of Prussia by King Wilhelm I, a monarch with a weakness for military uniforms and a baffling tolerance for Otto's antics. If you think Bismarck was handed the keys to the kingdom on a silver platter, think again. His appointment was more like being gifted a ticking time bomb. Prussia was embroiled in a constitutional crisis, with the king and the liberal parliament at loggerheads over military reforms. Wilhelm wanted to beef up the army. The parliament wanted to beef up their say in governance. Enter Bismarck, armed with his infamous pragmatism and a speech that would become the stuff of legend or infamy, depending on whom you ask. In his very first speech as Prime Minister, Bismarck laid down the law, or rather, the lack thereof. His blood and iron proclamation was less of a motivational pep talk and more of a verbal slap in the face. The great questions of the day will not be settled by speeches and majority decisions, he declared, but by iron and blood. It was a statement that could make even the most hardened cynic sit up and take notice. While politicians of the day were busy waxing lyrical about diplomacy, Bismarck was making it clear that he had no qualms about getting his hands dirty, literally. The speech might have sounded like the ramblings of a madman, but it had a kernel of brutal honesty. Bismarck was stating what everyone secretly feared, that diplomacy without power was as effective as a chocolate teapot. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't exactly right either. This was an era when war was still considered a legitimate political tool, and Bismarck was about to wield it like a craftsman with a very blunt instrument. The first test of his blood and iron policy came with the Danish War of 1864. This was Bismarck's version of dipping his toe into the waters of international conflict, except he cannonballed in with gusto. The war was ostensibly about the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, territories that were as contested as the last slice of pizza at a frat party. Bismarck, with an eye for opportunity, saw the chance to rally the German states against a common enemy. It worked. The war was short, sharp, and a victory for Prussia and Austria, who were unlikely bedfellows in this venture. The duchies were divided, and Bismarck had his first taste of success on the international stage. But if you thought Bismarck was about to rest on his laurels, think again. The man was just warming up. His next act was the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, also known as the 7 Weeks' War, because Bismarck preferred his conflicts like his speeches, quick and decisive. This time, the target was Austria, Prussia's erstwhile ally, and a rival for influence in the German Confederation, a loose conglomeration of German states that was about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Bismarck's strategy was simple yet cunning. He isolated Austria diplomatically, securing neutrality from France, Russia, and Italy. Then he provoked Austria into war, a move that was both audacious and reckless. The Austrians, perhaps expecting a gentlemanly duel, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The war culminated in the Battle of Königgrätz, where the Prussian army, utilizing their superior rail networks and breech-loading rifles, delivered a knockout punch that left Austria reeling. The victory was a masterstroke, but what followed was pure political theater. Rather than annex Austria or humiliate it further, Bismarck offered lenient peace terms. Why? Because he knew that today's enemy could be tomorrow's ally. This was classic Bismarck, ruthless in battle, shrewd in peace. He dismantled the German Confederation and established the North German Confederation under Prussian leadership. Austria was gracefully shown the door, left to lick its wounds and ponder its diminished influence. In the grand chess game of European politics, Bismarck was playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else was fumbling with checkers. But let's not get carried away with the myth of the infallible strategist. Bismarck's maneuvers were daring, yes, but they were also fraught with risk. Each decision was a roll of the dice, and one misstep could have sent his carefully constructed house of cards tumbling. The man was a gambler of the highest order, and for him, the stakes were nothing less than the future of Germany. Speaking of Germany, the unification was still a work in progress. Bismarck had cobbled together a coalition of northern German states, but the south was still a patchwork of independent entities, not entirely sold on the idea of Prussian dominance. Enter the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, the final move in Bismarck's unification gambit. This conflict was as much about national pride as it was about political necessity. France, under Napoleon Roman III, was wary of a powerful Germany on its eastern border, a sentiment Bismarck exploited with Machiavellian flair. The war was sparked by the Ems dispatch, a telegram that Bismarck edited to provoke French indignation. It worked like a charm. France declared war, and the southern German states, previously hesitant, rallied to Prussia's side in the name of national unity. The conflict was swift and decisive, a familiar theme in Bismarck's playbook. The German forces, efficient and well-coordinated, swept through France with alarming speed, culminating in a siege of Paris that ended with the French capitulation in 1871. The crowning moment came in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, where Wilhelm I was proclaimed Emperor of a unified Germany. It was a moment of triumph, orchestrated by Bismarck with all the flair of a grand opera. But behind the pomp and circumstance lay a tapestry of intrigue, manipulation, and no small amount of irony. The unification of Germany was a feat of political engineering, a masterclass in realpolitik, but also a prelude to the tensions that would eventually explode into the 20th century's cataclysms. Bismarck's legacy as the architect of German unification is undeniable, but to paint him as an unerring genius would be to miss the point. He was a man of contradictions, a strategist who thrived on chaos, yet sought stability. His alliances were as unpredictable as they were effective, a testament to his ability to balance on the razor's edge of diplomacy and brinksmanship. In the end, the man who reshaped Europe was not a mythic hero, but a complex, flawed, and utterly fascinating figure, a testament to the truism that history is written in shades of grey, not black and white. Now, just when you think Bismarck might have hung up his political spurs after unifying Germany, he surprises everyone by donning a new hat, that of a domestic reformer. Yes, the same man who once declared that blood and iron would settle the great questions of the day decided to dabble in social welfare. Picture Otto von Bismarck, the political heavyweight known for his iron-fisted diplomacy, suddenly moonlighting as a pioneering social reformer. It's like finding out Darth Vader had a soft spot for Ewoks. But before we get too carried away with the image of Bismarck as a benevolent caretaker, let's set the record straight. The man was nothing if not pragmatic. His foray into social welfare wasn't born out of a newfound altruism, but rather a strategic maneuver to maintain political stability in a rapidly industrializing Germany. The Industrial Revolution had turned the country into an economic powerhouse, but it was also a hotbed of social unrest. Workers were toiling in factories under brutal conditions, and the spectre of socialism loomed large. Bismarck, ever the political chess master, saw an opportunity to outflank his socialist opponents by co-opting their agenda. Enter the social welfare state, Bismarck style. Between 1883 and 1889, he implemented groundbreaking reforms that laid the foundation for modern social security systems. First on the agenda was the Health Insurance Bill of 1883. This was no small feat. The bill mandated that employers and workers contribute to a fund that provided medical care and sick pay, covering about 10% of the German population initially. It was a savvy move, offering a safety net that would keep workers healthy and, more importantly, productive. The irony, of course, is that this initiative came from a man who likely viewed socialists as more of a nuisance than a noble cause. Next up was the Accident Insurance Bill of 1884. Bismarck, perhaps foreseeing the occupational hazards of a burgeoning industrial economy, introduced a scheme that required employers to insure their workers against workplace accidents. This wasn't just a nod to worker safety. It was a calculated attempt to diminish the appeal of socialist rhetoric by demonstrating that the state could take care of its citizens better than any leftist manifesto. But Bismarck wasn't done yet. In 1889, he rolled out the Old Age and Disability Insurance Bill, a precursor to modern pension systems. This reform provided pensions to workers over the age of 70 and those permanently disabled. Now, before you start picturing Bismarck as the grandfather of the welfare state, remember that the average life expectancy at the time was around 45 years. So, while the idea of a pension was revolutionary, the practical benefits were more limited than they might first appear. What's fascinating here is the juxtaposition between Bismarck's authoritarian governance and these seemingly progressive policies. It's like watching a strict headmaster suddenly organize a school fair. The man was a bundle of contradictions, a testament to his unique brand of realpolitik. He wasn't about to let ideology get in the way of maintaining control. In Bismarck's world, social welfare was less about compassion and more about power, keeping the proletariat content enough to avoid uprising. And let's not gloss over the economic implications. These reforms were an investment in human capital, a term that would probably have brought a wry smile to Bismarck's lips. By ensuring a healthier, more secure workforce, he was laying the groundwork for sustained economic growth. It was a masterstroke of long-term planning, even if the motivations weren't entirely noble. The costs were shared between workers, employers, and the state, a balancing act that demonstrated Bismarck's knack for pragmatic compromise. So, what does this tell us about the man behind the Iron Mask? Bismarck was a political chameleon, adapting his strategies to suit the changing landscape. He understood that the key to maintaining his grip on power lay not just in military might, but in winning the loyalty of the masses. By implementing these reforms, he effectively undercut the socialist movement and reinforced the authority of the state. It was a calculated risk, but one that paid off, cementing his legacy as a shrewd tactician who could play the long game with aplomb. In the grand scheme of things, Bismarck's domestic policies reveal the complexities of governance in a rapidly changing world. The challenges he faced were not unlike those of today: economic inequality, social unrest, and the constant push and pull between progress and tradition. Bismarck's solutions might have been driven by self-interest, but they were also a testament to his ability to navigate the turbulent waters of 19th century politics with a steady hand and an unwavering gaze fixed firmly on the horizon. And so, the Iron Chancellor continues to perplex and fascinate, a figure whose legacy is as multifaceted as the man himself. He was a statesman who understood the power of paradox, wielding it like a craftsman who knows the value of both the hammer and the anvil. As we delve deeper into his story, one thing becomes clear. Otto von Bismarck was a man who defied easy categorization, a historical enigma wrapped in a very Prussian riddle. But stay tuned. There's more to this tale than meets the monocle. But let's not get too comfortable in the domestic sphere, because Bismarck's true playground was the grand stage of European diplomacy, where he was less a player and more the puppeteer pulling strings with an iron grip. His foreign policy was the stuff of legend, a complex web of alliances and enmities that resembled a soap opera more than a stately chess match. And like any good soap opera, it was full of intrigue, drama, and the occasional slap in the face. Bismarck's approach to foreign policy was not for the faint of heart. He was the maestro of realpolitik, a term that might sound like something you'd need a prescription for, but is actually the practice of tough-minded, pragmatic politics. For Bismarck, ideals were fine and dandy in speeches, but power and survival were the real currency. And in the volatile world of 19th century Europe, staying alive meant keeping everyone else just off balance enough to avoid them ganging up on you. After the unification of Germany in 1871, Bismarck's immediate goal was to maintain the delicate balance of power in Europe. This was not just a matter of national pride, but a practical necessity. A unified Germany was a powerhouse, a new kid on the block with industrial biceps and a shiny new empire to boot. The last thing Bismarck wanted was a coalition of the willing or unwilling, determined to knock Germany down a peg. So, he set about creating an intricate alliance system that could give any soap opera writer a run for their money. At the heart of Bismarck's foreign policy was the Dreikaiserbund, or Three Emperors League, formed in 1873. It was a gentleman's club of sorts, bringing together the emperors of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. The idea was to keep the peace between these three powers, or at least keep them from bickering like siblings fighting over the front seat. Bismarck knew that any conflict between Austria-Hungary and Russia over the Balkans could easily escalate into a full-blown European war, which would be about as fun as a root canal without anesthesia. But here's where the comedy of Bismarck's diplomacy comes into play. Keeping these three emperors happy was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Russia and Austria-Hungary had a long-standing rivalry over the Balkans, and Bismarck's job was to keep them from setting the whole region on fire. His solution? A series of treaties that were as complex as they were fragile, each one designed to ensure that any potential conflict could be diffused before it started. It was like having a fire extinguisher at the ready, while simultaneously dousing everything in gasoline. In 1879, Bismarck crafted the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, a defensive pact that was as much about keeping friends close as it was about keeping enemies closer. The logic was simple. Austria-Hungary would be a valuable ally against any Russian aggression, and vice versa. But the real kicker was the reinsurance treaty of 1887, a secret agreement with Russia that promised neutrality in the event that either nation found itself at war with a third party. This was Bismarck's insurance policy, ensuring that Russia wouldn't side with France in the event of a German conflict with one of them. Now, if you're keeping track, that's Germany allied with Austria-Hungary, but also secretly cozying up to Russia. Sound complicated? That's because it was. Bismarck's foreign policy was a high-wire act, balancing on the razor's edge of diplomacy. One misstep, and the whole system could come crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. But let's not forget Bismarck's piece de resistance, the Triple Alliance of 1882, which brought Italy into the fold alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy, the perennial underdog of Europe, was eager to join the club, partly to flex its newfound national muscles, and partly because nobody wants to be left out of the party. This alliance further solidified Germany's position, creating a formidable bloc that would deter potential adversaries and maintain the status quo. However, Bismarck's mastery wasn't just about crafting treaties. It was about reading the room better than anyone else. He had an uncanny ability to predict the moves of other nations, a geopolitical chess master who seemed to know what his opponents were going to do before they did. And if that meant playing them off against each other, so be it. The man was a maestro at orchestrating tension, a conductor of chaos who understood that peace in Europe was best maintained through a careful balance of calculated paranoia. Of course, not all of Bismarck's diplomacy was conducted in the shadowy halls of power. He also had a keen sense of timing and a knack for turning crises into opportunities. Take the Congress of Berlin in 1878, for example. The Balkans were, as always, a powder keg, with the Russo-Turkish War threatening to spiral into a broader conflict. Bismarck hosted the Congress with all the panache of a seasoned diplomat, managing to broker a deal that satisfied nobody but prevented a greater calamity. It was classic Bismarck, solving one problem while quietly setting the stage for the next. In the end, Bismarck's foreign policy was a masterclass in diplomacy, a high-stakes game where the stakes were nothing less than the fate of Europe. His alliances, though complex and sometimes contradictory, were a testament to his ability to keep the peace through a delicate dance of diplomacy and distrust. He was the puppet master of Europe, pulling strings with a deft hand and an eye for the long game. But like any good drama, Bismarck's diplomatic ballet was fraught with risk. His system relied heavily on his own ability to manage the egos and ambitions of Europe's great powers. It was a house of cards, built on the shifting sands of international politics, and only time would tell if it could withstand the inevitable storm. As we delve deeper into Bismarck's story, the tension mounts, the stakes rise, and the game continues. Stay tuned, because the Iron Chancellor's tale is far from over. As the curtain rose on the final act of Otto von Bismarck's political theater, the stage was set for a dramatic exit that no one, perhaps not even Bismarck himself, had fully anticipated. Our Iron Chancellor, who had deftly navigated the choppy waters of European diplomacy with all the finesse of a seasoned mariner, found himself unceremoniously tossed overboard by none other than Kaiser Wilhelm Roman II. Yes, the same Wilhelm who seemed to have an affinity for military pageantry and a knack for turning political strategy into a grand spectacle. Bismarck's dismissal in 1890 was less a gentle retirement and more a political coup de grace. Imagine a seasoned pilot being thrown overboard just as the ship of state seemed to be cruising smoothly. The irony was almost Shakespearean. Here was a man who'd spent decades weaving an intricate web of alliances, only to be ousted by a young Kaiser who was eager to sail the ship in a new direction, preferably with more pomp and less pragmatism. So, what led to this dramatic fall from grace? Well, let's just say Bismarck's relationship with Wilhelm Roman II was less of a harmonious duet and more of a cacophonous clash of egos. Bismarck, the seasoned statesman with a penchant for realpolitik, had little patience for Wilhelm's youthful exuberance and desire for personal glory. Meanwhile, Wilhelm, just 29 when he ascended the throne, was keen to assert his authority and shake off the long shadow cast by his grandfather's Chancellor. It was a classic case of the old guard versus the new, and in this clash of titans, Bismarck found himself on the losing side. The specific catalyst for Bismarck's dismissal was a disagreement over domestic policy, specifically the anti-socialist laws, which Bismarck wanted to renew, while Wilhelm preferred a more conciliatory approach. Bismarck, ever the pragmatist, saw socialism as a threat to the stability of the German Empire, while Wilhelm believed he could win over the working class with charm and reform. It was a classic battle of ideology versus practicality, and this time, ideology won. On March 18, 1890, Wilhelm summoned Bismarck to the palace and delivered the final blow, a request for the Chancellor's resignation. And just like that, Bismarck's illustrious career came to an abrupt end. His dismissal was met with shock and disbelief, both at home and abroad. The Iron Chancellor, the architect of German unification, was suddenly relegated to the sidelines, a historical footnote in the grand tapestry of European politics. But as history has shown time and again, the end of one chapter often sets the stage for the beginning of another, and Bismarck's legacy would prove to be as complex and enduring as the man himself. In the years following his dismissal, Bismarck retreated to his estate at Friedrichsruh, where he spent his days writing memoirs and entertaining visitors with tales of his political exploits. If there was any bitterness over his forced retirement, Bismarck rarely showed it. Instead, he seemed content to watch from the sidelines as the empire he had helped build navigated the turbulent waters of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But what of Bismarck's legacy? How does history remember the Iron Chancellor, the man who once declared that the great questions of the day would be settled not by speeches and majority decisions, but by iron and blood? Well, it's a legacy as multifaceted as a well-cut diamond, full of brilliance and sharp edges. On one hand, Bismarck is celebrated as the architect of German unification, a master strategist whose political acumen reshaped the map of Europe. His ability to balance alliances, outmaneuver adversaries, and maintain stability in a continent teetering on the brink of chaos is nothing short of legendary. Bismarck's realpolitik, though often criticized for its ruthlessness, was a necessary counterbalance to the idealism and naivety that characterized much of 19th century politics. Yet, on the other hand, Bismarck's legacy is not without its shadows. His system of alliances, though brilliant in its complexity, was also inherently unstable. It relied heavily on his personal diplomacy and the delicate balance of power he had crafted. Once removed from the equation, the alliances began to unravel, setting the stage for the tensions that would eventually lead to the First World War. It's a reminder that even the most masterful political constructions are only as strong as the hands that hold them together. Moreover, Bismarck's domestic policies, while innovative, were often driven by pragmatism rather than principle. His social welfare reforms, though groundbreaking, were primarily designed to placate the working class and undermine socialist movements. His authoritarian approach to governance, characterized by censorship and repression, left a legacy of political rigidity that would haunt Germany long after his departure. So why, then, does Bismarck's story continue to captivate our imaginations today? Perhaps it's because he embodies the eternal struggle between power and principle, a statesman who walked the fine line between pragmatism and ambition. His story is a testament to the complexities of leadership, a reminder that history rarely offers clear-cut heroes or villains, but rather individuals who are as flawed and fascinating as the times in which they lived. In the end, Bismarck's legacy is a mirror reflecting the paradoxes of human nature, ambitious yet cautious, ruthless yet shrewd. He was a man who understood the game of politics better than most, yet ultimately fell victim to the very forces he sought to control. His story is a poignant reminder that in the grand theatre of history, even the most formidable actors must eventually take their final bow. And as we close the curtain on Bismarck's tale, we are left with a legacy that is both a cautionary tale and an enduring testament to the power of political will. His life is a reminder that history is not a static narrative, but a dynamic interplay of individuals, ideas, and events. In the annals of history, Bismarck remains an enigmatic figure, a statesman who wielded power with an iron hand and a calculating mind, leaving an indelible mark on the world that would echo for generations to come. If you think your family gatherings are awkward, wait till you hear about the young Princess Hatshepsut. Born around 1507 BCE in the bustling city of Thebes, modern-day Luxor, for those keeping track, she was no ordinary kid. As the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, she wasn't exactly spending her days waiting for some fairy tale prince. No, Hatshepsut was the future rock star of the 18th dynasty, and her early life was anything but ordinary. Thebes at that time was a hive of activity. It wasn't just a city, it was the epicenter of Egyptian culture and power. Think of it as the New York of ancient Egypt, minus the bagels, but with a lot more hieroglyphs. Growing up in the royal palace, Hatshepsut witnessed the grandeur of her father's reign. Thutmose I was no slouch. His military campaigns extended Egypt's borders far and wide. He was the kind of pharaoh who left his mark, literally, in the form of monuments and temples. Now, you might think that being born into royalty is all sunshine and pyramids, but there was a catch. The 18th dynasty had a peculiar tradition that might make your eyebrows take a trip north on your forehead: sibling marriage. Hatshepsut was married off to her half-brother Thutmose Roman II. Keep in mind, this wasn't just a case of keeping it in the family. It was about preserving the divine bloodline, or so they believed. It was like playing a game of familial Jenga, hoping not to topple the divine tower. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before tying the knot with her half-brother, young Hatshepsut was already making waves. She was intelligent, ambitious, and had a knack for politics that would make Machiavelli tip his hat. Her education wasn't limited to learning how to walk like an Egyptian. She was schooled in the art of governance, religious rituals, and the all-important skill of reading hieroglyphs. Because if you couldn't read the ancient tweets carved into temple walls, how would you know what's trending? The political scene was a complex web of alliances and power plays. As a royal daughter, Hatshepsut learned early on that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. Her father, Thutmose I, understood this well. He wasn't just a warrior king. He was a master of propaganda, ensuring his image was one of divine strength. After all, when you're trying to convince a nation that you're the living embodiment of a god, you can't exactly skimp on the marketing. Fast forward a bit, and we find Hatshepsut married to Thutmose Roman II. Now, Thutmose Roman II wasn't exactly the most dynamic ruler. He was more of a placeholder pharaoh, if you will. His reign was relatively short, about 13 years, from 1493 to 1479 BCE. During this time, Hatshepsut began to show her true colors. She wasn't content to be the woman behind the man. She was more interested in being the woman in front of the man, preferably on a throne with a crown. Her husband's reign was marked by a few military campaigns and the usual pharaonic duties, but it was clear that Hatshepsut was the one wearing the proverbial pants. She was involved in state affairs and had a hand in decision-making. When Thutmose Roman II died, the throne was left to his son, Thutmose Roman III, who was still a child. And this, dear listener, is where the plot thickens. Hatshepsut wasn't about to let a kid rule the kingdom. She had tasted power and wasn't ready to give it up. So she did what any power-savvy royal would do. She declared herself pharaoh, not queen. Pharaoh, not just any pharaoh, but one backed by divine mandate. She claimed to be the chosen one of the god Ammon, which, in ancient Egyptian terms, was the ultimate mic drop. But let's not skip ahead too much. In her early years, Hatshepsut had already laid the groundwork for her future rule. By marrying Thutmose Roman II, she solidified her position in the royal hierarchy. She was no mere consort. She was a co-ruler in all but name. And when the opportunity arose, she seized it with both hands. Her ambition was matched only by her strategic brilliance. In a world where gender roles were as rigid as the stone statues lining the Nile, Hatshepsut was an anomaly. She didn't just break the mold, she pulverized it with the force of a Nile flood. Her early life was a testament to her intelligence and cunning, qualities that would serve her well in the years to come. She was a trailblazer, a pharaoh in every sense of the word, and she wasn't about to let tradition stand in her way. As we wrap up this chapter of her life, it's clear that Hatshepsut was more than just a footnote in history. She was a force of nature, a woman who defied the odds and carved her own path. Her story is one of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. But hold on to your scarabs, this is just the beginning. So, picture Hatshepsut standing at the crossroads of history, a young widow with a toddler stepson who had a pretty lousy claim to the throne. Thutmose Roman III was more interested in what toy sphinx to drool on next than in ruling one of the world's most powerful empires. Talk about inconvenient. This was Hatshepsut's moment, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers like sand through an hourglass. Now, the move from regent to pharaoh wasn't exactly as simple as flipping a switch. It required a calculated blend of charm, ambition, and the kind of political maneuvering that would make a chess grandmaster's head spin. In short, Hatshepsut didn't just step into power. She sashayed in with all the grace of a Nile crocodile with a master plan. First, she played the regency card like a pro, ruling on behalf of her underage stepson. Picture it. She's in the driver's seat of the chariot, and little Thutmose is in the back with a sippy cup. But Hatshepsut had no plans to be a temporary fixture. She declared herself pharaoh, a title traditionally reserved for men, and in doing so, she turned the entire gender norm on its head. Talk about a power move. Her transition wasn't just a matter of changing titles. It was a full-on rebranding campaign. Hatshepsut adopted the regalia of a pharaoh, complete with the false beard and kilt, because, let's face it, nothing says I'm in charge like sporting a chin strap made of goat hair. This wasn't just dress-up. It was a strategic move to solidify her authority in a patriarchal society that didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for female rulers. But don't be fooled into thinking she pulled this off by sheer force of will alone. Hatshepsut was a master of ancient PR, and she needed to ensure her image was as polished as the limestone of her monuments. She portrayed herself as the divine offspring of the god Ammon, which was like getting a celestial thumbs up. It's hard to argue with someone who's got a god in their corner, right? Her reign was anything but ordinary. Hatshepsut embarked on ambitious building projects that would make even the most seasoned architects break a sweat. The jewel in her architectural crown was the magnificent temple at Deir el-Bahri, which wasn't just a temple, but a veritable statement piece. Nestled against the cliffs of Thebes, it was a testament to her vision and power, a sprawling complex that screamed, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The temple wasn't just an exercise in grandeur. It was a brilliant stroke of political genius. She filled it with reliefs depicting her divine birth and coronation, essentially rewriting history to cement her legitimacy. It was the ancient equivalent of a social media campaign, with stone carvings instead of Instagram posts. Each etching was a reminder to her subjects, and any potential rivals, that she was the pharaoh for a reason. You might wonder, was there any backlash? You bet. Whispers of usurpation echoed through the corridors of power, but Hatshepsut wasn't fazed. She knew that ruling over Egypt required more than brute force or lineage. It required the kind of political acumen that could turn critics into allies. She was a pragmatic ruler, shrewd enough to know that keeping the priesthood happy was key to maintaining stability. She lavished attention and resources on Ammon's temples, ensuring that the religious establishment was firmly in her corner. When the guards are on your side, who's going to argue? But let's debunk a myth here. The idea that Hatshepsut was some Machiavellian overlord who snatched power out of sheer greed. The reality is more nuanced. Yes, she was ambitious, but she was also a stabilizing force in a time when Egypt could have easily slipped into chaos. Her rise wasn't just a grab for power. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign that ensured continuity and prosperity. In fact, Hatshepsut's reign was marked by peace and economic prosperity. She reopened trade routes that had been dormant, like the famous expedition to Punt, which brought back gold, incense, and myrrh. This was no small feat. It was a diplomatic triumph that bolstered Egypt's economy and her own, standing as a ruler. When you can fill the treasury and the temples, it's safe to say you've got the people's support. And speaking of support, it's crucial to acknowledge that Hatshepsut wasn't a lone wolf. She surrounded herself with capable advisors, like Senenmut, her steward and possible confidant, who helped her execute her vision. These alliances were more than just political. They were the bedrock of her administration. It wasn't just Hatshepsut's show. It was a team effort, with her as the indisputable captain. Hatshepsut's story is one of calculated risks and strategic brilliance. She didn't just seize power, she earned it, proving that leadership isn't about who you are but what you can accomplish. Her reign challenges the simplistic narrative of a power-hungry usurper, revealing instead a ruler who understood the complexities of governance and diplomacy. As we delve deeper into Hatshepsut's reign, it becomes clear that her legacy is more than just a footnote in history. She was a trailblazer, a woman who carved her own path in a world that wasn't ready for her brilliance. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to her story, and the plot is about to thicken, with twists and turns that would make any modern drama look like child's play. So, stay tuned, because the tale of Hatshepsut is far from over. So, let's set sail with Hatshepsut's most audacious endeavor, the grand expedition to Punt, a place famously shrouded in mystery and allure. If ancient Egypt had a bucket list, a trip to Punt would be right at the top. This voyage was the Titanic of its day, minus the iceberg, and with a lot more incense. Hatshepsut wasn't just after a few souvenirs. She was on a mission to bring back treasures that would make even the most seasoned pharaohs green with envy. But before you imagine a leisurely cruise down the Nile, let's talk about the logistical circus involved in organizing this trip. Picture this, assembling a fleet of 5 massive ships, each as long as a blue whale, ready to tackle a journey of over 200 miles. And this wasn't just a couple of guys with paddles. We're talking about a full-blown crew, complete with sailors, soldiers, and diplomats. It was like orchestrating an ancient rock tour with an entourage that would rival even the most diva-like celebrities today. The destination, Punt, often described in texts as a land of plenty, but let's not get carried away. If Punt were a travel brochure, it would be full of airbrushed photos and exaggerated claims. Sure, it was rich in resources like gold, ebony, ivory, and the ever-elusive myrrh trees, but getting there was more of a feat than actually finding treasure. It was like the ancient world's version of a road trip to the end of the earth, with the added bonus of unpredictable weather and the looming threat of pirates. And speaking of myrrh trees, Hatshepsut's expedition brought back live specimens to be planted in Egypt. Imagine the scene. A procession carrying not just valuables, but actual trees, roots and all, as if they were eco-conscious tourists determined to be carbon neutral. Alongside these were the exotic animals, including baboons, which were the ancient equivalent of bringing back a koala from Australia. These weren't just novelties. They were status symbols, proof that Hatshepsut could do what others only dreamed of. Economically, Hatshepsut's expedition was a gold mine, quite literally. The influx of goods from Punt meant that Egypt wasn't just living off its own resources. The trade networks she revitalized were akin to opening a new Silk Road, with Egypt at its heart. This wasn't just about wealth. It was a statement of power and influence. Hatshepsut knew that a well-stocked treasury was as potent as any army, and she wielded this economic might with precision. Let's not forget the grandiose building projects that followed. With the wealth from Punt and other trade routes, Hatshepsut financed monumental constructions that would make even modern architects blanch. Her temple at Deir el-Bahri was just the beginning. These projects weren't mere vanity exercises. They were investments in Egypt's cultural and religious capital. Each stone laid was a testament to her reign, a way to ensure her legacy was carved into history, quite literally. Yet, let's not romanticize Punt too much. While it's tempting to think of it as some kind of ancient El Dorado, the reality was far less glamorous. Punt was as much a myth as it was a real place, its exact location still debated by historians. Was it part of modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or somewhere else along the Red Sea? The truth is, no one knows for sure. But isn't that the allure? The idea of a mystical land where the riches flow like the Nile itself. Hatshepsut's economic policies weren't just about expansion. They were about sustainability. Reopening trade routes that had laid dormant was like rebooting an ancient economy. It's easy to see why her reign was marked by prosperity. By stabilizing and expanding these networks, she ensured a steady flow of goods and influence into Egypt. This was a ruler who understood that a thriving economy was the bedrock of a stable reign. No war required. In the grand tapestry of history, Hatshepsut's foreign policy was a masterclass in diplomacy and ambition. She didn't just wait for opportunities, she created them. Her ability to leverage Egypt's position on the world stage was as much about perception as reality. By presenting Egypt as the land of the gods, she attracted traders, diplomats, and adventurers alike. It was a clever ploy, and it worked like a charm. As we explore the layers of Hatshepsut's rule, it's clear she wasn't just playing the game, she was rewriting the rules. Her economic and foreign policy achievements were a testament to her vision and strategic acumen. She understood that power wasn't just about military might, but about creating a legacy of prosperity and stability. So, where does this leave us? With a ruler who defied conventions and rewrote her own narrative. Hatshepsut's story is far from over, and as we continue to unravel her reign, the intrigue only deepens. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be every bit as captivating as the last. In the grand narrative of history, Hatshepsut's reign was a masterclass in rewriting both her destiny and that of Egypt, like a director flipping the script in the third act. Yet, just as her story was soaring, the curtain call loomed, shrouded in mystery and intrigue that would bewilder scholars and conspiracy theorists alike for millennia. As we dive into the twilight years of Hatshepsut's reign, the plot takes a decidedly murky turn. Here was a ruler whose power seemed as immutable as the pyramids themselves, yet she vanished from the scene with more questions than answers hanging in the air. We know that she ruled for around 22 years, from approximately 1479 to 1458 BCE, a tenure that was as impressive as it was controversial. But how did it all end? Was it a peaceful passing, a palace coup, or something more sinister? Grab your metaphorical archaeology tools, because we're digging deep into the sands of time. First up, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the obelisk, in the room, the mysterious erasure of Hatshepsut's legacy. Enter Thutmose Roman III, her stepson and eventual successor, who seemed to have a vendetta against his stepmom that would make any family therapist raise an eyebrow. After Hatshepsut's disappearance from the historical stage, Thutmose Roman III took the concept of cleaning house to a whole new level. His campaign of erasure involved defacing her monuments, chiseling her name out of history, and replacing her images with those of his own. It was like the world's first game of historical whack-a-mole, but with far more lasting implications. But why go to such lengths? Theories abound, ranging from petty jealousy to a strategic move to restore traditional male rule. Thutmose Roman III, who had been relegated to the sidelines during Hatshepsut's reign, might have seen her as an illegitimate ruler, a usurper who had interrupted the rightful male succession. Or perhaps it was more about cementing his own legacy by ensuring that his reign was seen as a continuation of his father, Thutmose Roman II, rather than an interruption by Hatshepsut. After all, nothing says, "I'm in charge now," like a little historical revisionism. Despite these attempts to erase her from the annals of history, Hatshepsut's legacy couldn't be entirely wiped away. The sheer grandeur of her architectural projects, like a mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, was too monumental to be completely obliterated. It's like trying to erase a skyscraper from a city skyline. Good luck with that. This enduring presence suggests that while Thutmose Roman III may have tried to scrub her name, the impact of her reign was etched too deeply into the fabric of Egypt to be entirely forgotten. As for Hatshepsut's death, the waters are as murky as the Nile in flood. Did she die of natural causes, or was foul play involved? Some speculate that she may have succumbed to illness. Cancer has been a popular postulation, given the detection of certain carcinogenic substances in her presumed remains. Others suggest that she might have been assassinated, though evidence for this is thinner than a papyrus scroll. The intrigue lies in the fact that we don't have a definitive answer, and that mystery only adds to her allure. The irony, of course, is that in trying to erase Hatshepsut, Thutmose Roman III may have inadvertently ensured her immortality. The very act of attempting to rewrite history has made her story all the more compelling, a tale of power and ambition that continues to captivate. It's a potent reminder of the dual nature of legacy. You can try to control it, but it often takes on a life of its own. And let's not overlook the economic and political savvy that characterized Hatshepsut's reign, lending credibility to the idea that her removal wasn't purely out of spite. Her reign had been a period of stability and prosperity, with trade routes open and the coffers filled. Her disappearance left a vacuum that Thutmose Roman III had to fill, which he did through extensive military campaigns that expanded Egypt's influence. But was it driven by a need to prove himself, to step out of her shadow, or simply to continue her legacy in his own way? Perhaps all three. In this tangled web of motives and mysteries, the truth remains elusive, wrapped in layers of myth and fact like a mummy in its tomb. What we can surmise, however, is that Hatshepsut was far more than the villainous usurper that some ancient spin doctors would have us believe. Her reign was marked not by chaos, but by innovation and prosperity. She was a ruler who understood the delicate balance of power, perception, and practicality, a master of the ancient political game. So, as we stand at this historical crossroads, contemplating the end of Hatshepsut's reign, we're left with a tapestry rich in both color and shadow. Her disappearance from history was not the end, but rather the beginning of an enduring legacy that will continue to inspire and confound. The plot thickens, and the stage is set for the next act, where the ripples of her reign will continue to be felt across the sands of time. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. It's merely paused at a tantalizing cliffhanger. And so, as the dust settled over the grand stage of ancient Egypt, Hatshepsut's tale took a detour through the murky shadows of time, where history's janitors, let's call them archaeologists, have been diligently sweeping away centuries of neglect to uncover the truth of her legacy. Fast forward to the 21st century, where modern technology and a dash of Indiana Jones flair have breathed new life into the narrative of this formidable pharaoh. Let's kick off with a plot twist that will give any soap opera a run for its money. Hatshepsut's mummy, long missing from the historical record, was identified in 2007. After years of playing hide and seek in the Valley of the Kings, it turned out she'd been resting in KV-60, a tomb she'd shared with her nurse, Sidorin. The discovery was akin to finding a lost episode of your favorite series, complete with the drama and intrigue only ancient Egypt could provide. Enter the hero of our modern quest, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's very own archaeological rock star. Armed with cutting-edge DNA analysis and a trusty CT scanner, his team matched a tooth found in a jar labeled with Hatshepsut's name to the mummy, confirming her identity. It was like an episode of CSI, Ancient Egypt, unraveling a mystery that had stumped historians for ages. With this revelation, the sands of time parted to reveal more than just a face. They exposed layers of history previously obscured by centuries of patriarchal bias. Speaking of bias, let's chew over the narrative that has long painted Hatshepsut as an overreaching usurper, the evil stepmother in Egypt's royal saga. For centuries, her story was told through a lens clouded by the misogynistic fog of later historians, including some ancient ones, who couldn't fathom a woman wielding power so effectively. But as we've learned over time, history has a way of doing a 180-degree turn when new facts come to light, and Hatshepsut's reputation has been no exception. In recent decades, academics have been busy resetting the record, highlighting the stability and prosperity that characterized her reign. And let's be honest, when it comes to pharaohs, the bar for stability wasn't exactly set high. In contrast to her male counterparts, who often equated power with conquest, Hatshepsut's rule was marked by peace, economic strength, and a focus on building rather than destroying. Her achievements challenged the antiquated notion that female rulers were inherently less capable, showing instead that power is about vision, not just victory on the battlefield. Economically, she was no slouch. Hatshepsut's reign saw the reopening of crucial trade routes, the kind that would make a modern CEO nod in approval. Her expedition to Punt alone was a logistical triumph that brought wealth and exotic goods to Egypt, reinforcing her status as a ruler who understood that a prosperous kingdom is a stable one. It's a lesson as relevant today as it was over 3,000 years ago. When you invest in infrastructure and trade, everyone wins, except maybe your enemies. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Thutmose Roman III erasure campaign. While it's tempting to see his actions as those of a resentful stepson, the reality is likely more complex. Thutmose Roman III was also a successful ruler, known for his military campaigns that expanded Egypt's borders to unprecedented extents. His attempts to erase Hatshepsut could have been driven by a desire to consolidate his own power and ensure his place in history without her overshadowing accomplishments. But here's the kicker. In trying to erase her, he inadvertently preserved her story, ensuring she remained a topic of fascination for generations to come. The modern rediscovery of Hatshepsut's achievements has sparked a re-evaluation of her legacy, one that acknowledges her as a trailblazer who redefined what it meant to be a ruler in ancient Egypt. Her story is a testament to the power of narrative in both its creation and destruction. It challenges us to question the stories we inherit and to look beyond the surface for the truths that lie beneath. As we wrap up this exploration of Hatshepsut's life and legacy, we're left with a portrait of a ruler who defied convention and carved out a place in history against the odds. Her reign was a masterclass in governance, showing that true leadership is about adaptability, innovation, and the courage to break the mold. In a world that often values conformity, Hatshepsut's story is a reminder that the path to greatness is rarely a straight line. So, dear listener, next time you find yourself pondering the annals of history, remember Hatshepsut, not just as a queen who dared to be king, but as a ruler whose life continues to inspire and provoke thought. Her legacy is a call to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives we are given, and to seek out the stories that challenge and enrich our understanding of the past. In the end, it's not just her name that endures, but the impact of her reign, an enduring testament to the power of vision, courage, and the indomitable spirit that refuses to be forgotten. Southern Africa in the early 19th century was a bit like a chaotic game of Risk, territories shifting, alliances forming, and everyone trying to avoid getting metaphorically, and sometimes literally, speared. In the middle of this dramatic landscape, we find the Zulu kingdom, a name that would soon echo through the pages of history. But let's be honest, when we say kingdom, we're talking about something that started off about the size of your average neighborhood park. It was here, in this fledgling realm, that a young warrior named Shaka was about to rewrite the rulebook of leadership with a sharp spear and an even sharper mind. Now, Shaka wasn't born into power. In fact, he was born into something of a soap opera. He was the illegitimate son of Senzangekona, chief of the Zulus, and Nandi, a woman from the Alangeni clan. This wasn't exactly a meet-cute that would end in a royal wedding. Shaka's early years were marked by the kind of family drama that makes Shakespearean plays look like a day in the park. His mother was ridiculed, and the young Shaka faced constant bullying from other kids. Think of it as a historic version of Mean Girls, but with more spears. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Before Shaka could become the legend he is today, Southern Africa was a patchwork of small chiefdoms and tribes, each with its own sense of identity and territory. The socio-political scene was a complex web of allegiances and rivalries, with the occasional cattle raid thrown in for good measure. Cattle were the currency of the day. Forget Bitcoin. If you had a few cows, you were in business. These animals were not just a source of food, but also a status symbol. The more cattle you owned, the more respect you commanded. Kind of like having a blue checkmark on social media, but a lot more useful if you were hungry. Into this world stepped Shaka, a man with big dreams and an even bigger determination not to let his past define his future. As a young man, he joined the army of the Mthethwa, under the leadership of Dingiswayo, a chief who was quite the visionary himself. Dingiswayo recognized Shaka's potential, mentoring him like a Jedi master with a penchant for military strategy instead of lightsabers. Shaka thrived in this environment, honing his skills and developing innovative military tactics that would later make him famous or infamous, depending on which side of his spear you found yourself on. Shaka's rise wasn't just about personal ambition, though. It was also about timing. The early 19th century was a period of upheaval in southern Africa, a time historians refer to as the Mfecane, or the crushing. This era saw widespread chaos as tribes were displaced, and territories were reorganized like pieces on a chessboard. The reasons for this were varied: population pressures, droughts, and the arrival of Europeans who were busy carving up the African continent like a Thanksgiving turkey. Amidst this turmoil, Shaka saw an opportunity to unite the Zulu people and expand their influence. Here's where things get interesting. Shaka wasn't just a warrior. He was a tactician, a psychologist, and some would say a bit of a visionary tyrant. He revolutionized the way warfare was conducted. Before his time, battles were more like theatrical productions, with opponents facing off from a distance, hurling insults and the occasional spear. Shaka, however, introduced the Iklua, a short stabbing spear that transformed his warriors into a close combat force to be reckoned with. His famous bullhorn formation allowed his forces to envelop and crush enemies with precision and force. But while Shaka's military innovations were nothing short of genius, let's not sugarcoat it. The man had a penchant for brutality that could make a Game of Thrones episode look like a bedtime story. His methods were efficient, yes, but they were also ruthless. This was a time when power was maintained through fear as much as it was through respect. It's easy to romanticize the idea of a warrior king, but the reality was often far bloodier and complicated. Even as Shaka was busy turning the Zulu from a small tribe into a regional juggernaut, the socio-political landscape was shifting. European traders and settlers were slowly, but surely making their presence felt along the coast, bringing with them new technologies, diseases, and a penchant for drawing lines on maps that ignored the existing cultural and political realities. These outsiders viewed the African continent as a vast resource to be exploited, paying little attention to the complex societies that had been thriving long before their arrival. In this whirlwind of change, Shaka's ambition and military prowess turned the Zulu kingdom into a formidable force. By the mid-1820, Shaka controlled a region covering roughly 30,000 square kilometers, an impressive feat considering he started with a territory smaller than a football field. But while he expanded his kingdom, he also made enemies, both within his own ranks and beyond. His leadership style was, let's say, less about democratic consensus and more about absolute rule. Decisions were made swiftly, and dissent was not tolerated. Perhaps the most compelling part of Shaka's story is how he managed to transform not just the Zulu kingdom, but the entire region's socio-political landscape. His military strategies and statecraft laid the groundwork for what would become a powerful and centralized state. But this was no fairy tale. The cost was high, and the methods were often brutal. Shaka's reign was marked by both the unification and the decimation of numerous tribes and communities. As we wrap up this part of Shaka's tale, it's worth noting that his legacy is as complex as the man himself. To some, he is a hero and a unifier, a man who took a small tribe and turned it into a kingdom that could stand toe-to-toe with any force of his time. To others, he was a tyrant whose methods were as harsh as they were effective. But one thing is clear. Shaka's Zulu kingdom was more than just a footnote in history. It was a testament to what ambition, innovation, and a bit of ruthlessness could achieve in a world where survival was anything but guaranteed. So there you have it. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the drama of the Zulu kingdom is just getting started. Shaka's story is one of transformation and turbulence, a tale that combines the best and worst of human nature in a land where the stakes were as high as the African sky. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of an epic saga that has fascinated historians and truth-seekers for centuries. As we dive further into the saga of Shaka and his military brilliance, it's worth pausing to appreciate just how much he revolutionized the art of war. Shaka didn't just tweak the existing playbook, he tore it up and wrote a new one in bold ink with plenty of exclamation points. His innovations were as audacious as they were effective, transforming the Zulu army from a ragtag bunch into a force that had neighboring tribes quaking in their sandals, or lack thereof, as we'll soon discuss. Let's start with the infamous bullhorns formation. Picture this. You're a warrior in Shaka's army, and your squad is about to engage an enemy force. Instead of charging headlong like a pack of unruly bulls, Shaka has you maneuver with the precision of a military ballet. The formation itself is a masterpiece of strategy, designed to encircle and overwhelm the enemy. The horns are the fast, agile flanks that sweep around to encircle the opposing forces, while the chest is the steadfast core that holds the line and engages the enemy head-on. Finally, the loins are the reserves, ready to reinforce any weak points or exploit a breach. This wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. Before Shaka, battles were often little more than glorified skirmishes, with warriors hurling spears from a distance and hoping for the best. Shaka, however, wasn't interested in playing a game of chance. His tactics emphasized close combat, a terrifying prospect for his enemies and a testament to his soldiers' training and discipline. The introduction of the Iklua, a short stabbing spear, was a game changer. It allowed Shaka's warriors to engage in hand-to-hand combat getting up close and personal in a way that was both intimate and deadly. Now, about those barefoot warriors. The romantic image of Zulu soldiers sprinting across thorny fields with nothing but calloused feet and sheer determination is a great story, but let's not get too carried away. While it's true that Shaka insisted on rigorous training, which included running long distances barefoot to toughen up his troops, the idea that they waltzed across thorn fields like it was a stroll in the park is a bit of a stretch. The reality is more nuanced and less cinematic. Sure, they were trained to endure hardships, but even the toughest warriors knew better than to trample through thorny underbrush without a good reason. Underpinning these military innovations was a logistical marvel. Shaka was a master organizer, turning the Zulu army into a well-oiled machine. His regiments, or amabatho, were more than just fighting units. They were communities, with warriors living and training together, building camaraderie that translated into battlefield cohesion. Each regiment had its own identity, complete with distinct insignias and uniforms. Think of it as ancient military branding. This sense of unity and pride was crucial for maintaining morale and ensuring that each soldier was willing to fight to the last breath. But let's not sugarcoat Shaka's methods. He was as ruthless as he was strategic, maintaining control through a combination of charisma and fear. His disciplinary measures were harsh, to say the least. Cowardice or failure in battle wasn't just frowned upon, it could lead to execution. This brutal efficiency ensured that the Zulu army operated with the precision of a Swiss watch, albeit one with a particularly sharp hour hand. Beyond the battlefield, Shaka's organizational skills extended to the economic and socio-political realms. He understood that a strong military needed a strong economy, and he worked tirelessly to ensure a steady supply of resources. Cattle raids were not just acts of aggression, but strategic moves to acquire wealth and resources. Shaka's kingdom was a well-structured state, with a centralized authority that allowed for efficient governance and resource distribution. This wasn't just about power for power's sake. It was about ensuring the Zulu kingdom's survival and prosperity in a world where threats were as numerous as the stars in the African night sky. Shaka's leadership style, let's call it benevolent dictatorship with a side of terror, wasn't without its detractors. Even within his ranks, there were those who resented his iron grip. But his ability to inspire loyalty, or at least obedience, was undeniable. His soldiers were willing to follow him into the jaws of death, not just because they feared him, but because they believed in the vision he had for the Zulu people. Yet, for all his military genius and organizational prowess, Shaka was a man of contradictions. He was a visionary leader who could also be a tyrant, a unifier who could just as easily be a destroyer. His story is one of complexity and paradox, illustrating the duality of human nature when power, ambition, and survival converge. In the grand tapestry of history, Shaka's legacy is woven with threads of both glory and bloodshed. He transformed the Zulu kingdom into a formidable power, but his methods left a trail of devastation in their wake. As we continue to explore his era, we'll see how his innovations shaped not just the Zulu kingdom, but the entire region, leaving an indelible mark on the pages of history. The tale of Shaka is far from over. With each strategic victory and tactical masterstroke, he solidified his place as one of the most formidable leaders of his time. But the very traits that propelled him to greatness also sowed the seeds of his downfall. As we journey deeper into this epic, we'll uncover more about the man behind the myth, the strategies that defined an era, and the consequences of his relentless pursuit of power. The stage is set, the drama unfolds, and in the world of the Zulu, the stakes have never been higher. As Shaka forged ahead, expanding the Zulu kingdom with the ferocity of a wildfire in the African savannah, the logistical realities of empire building began to rear their decidedly less glamorous heads. You see, conquering vast swaths of territory wasn't just about thrusting spears and flexing military muscle. It required an intricate balancing act of politics, economics, and the kind of logistical prowess that would make a modern-day supply chain manager break out in a cold sweat. Let's start with the basics. Food. Armies march on their stomachs, and Shaka's warriors were no exception. The Zulu military machine was a ravenous beast, requiring a steady stream of sustenance to keep it running. This wasn't a simple matter of sending warriors off with a packed lunch and a pat on the back. Oh no, we're talking about feeding thousands of soldiers who were always on the move, like a particularly aggressive traveling circus, minus the clowns, unless you count the occasional jesters who dared question Shaka's authority. Cattle were the backbone of the Zulu economy, and managing these herds became a crucial part of Shaka's strategy. Every campaign required careful planning to ensure that the warriors and their livestock had enough grazing land and water sources. It wasn't just about keeping the warriors fed. It was about sustaining the entire ecosystem that supported the army. Picture a mobile village, complete with warriors, cattle, and support staff, all requiring resources and coordination. The Zulus had to be as adept at logistics as they were at warfare, ensuring that supplies were replenished, often through strategic cattle raids and clever negotiations. But while feeding an army was one thing, maintaining morale and loyalty was quite another. Shaka's regime was a mix of carrot and stick, with more stick than carrot, to be honest. His warriors were not just soldiers. They were part of a tightly knit social structure that fostered loyalty and discipline. Each regiment functioned like a family unit, complete with its own identity and hierarchy. This sense of belonging was crucial for maintaining the cohesion and effectiveness of Shaka's forces, ensuring they fought with the ferocity of a lion protecting its pride. Of course, expanding a kingdom wasn't just about military might and clever logistics. Shaka was also a master of political finesse, understanding that alliances could be as powerful as any spear. He forged strategic alliances with neighboring tribes, sometimes through diplomacy, other times through force. These alliances were not just about expanding territory. They were about securing resources and creating a network of support that would bolster the Zulu kingdom's power. One of Shaka's most significant alliances was with the Q-Wave, a powerful neighboring tribe. This alliance wasn't sealed with a handshake or a friendly game of checkers. It was cemented through marriage and mutual benefit. By aligning with the Q-Wave, Shaka not only expanded his influence, but also secured a vital buffer against potential threats. This kind of political maneuvering was crucial in a region where allegiances could shift as quickly as the sands of the Kalahari. But let's not get too starry-eyed about Shaka's diplomacy. His alliances were often forged under the shadow of his spear, and loyalty wasn't always voluntary. When diplomacy failed, force was always an option. It was a classic case of join me or face the consequences, a strategy that expanded his kingdom, but also sowed seeds of resentment that would later sprout into full-blown rebellion. As Shaka's kingdom grew, so did the challenges of governance. The Zulu kingdom was no longer a small tribe, but a sprawling empire that required an effective administration to keep it running smoothly. Shaka implemented a centralized system of governance, with appointed chiefs overseeing different regions. This ensured that his rule was felt throughout the kingdom, maintaining order and stability in a landscape that could easily descend into chaos. Shaka's administrative prowess was impressive, but it was also a double-edged sword. His centralized control meant that power was concentrated in his hands, leaving little room for dissent or deviation from his vision. This level of control ensured efficiency, but also created an environment where fear was a powerful motivator. Chiefs and warriors alike knew that failure or disobedience could result in swift and brutal punishment. Despite these challenges, Shaka's reign was marked by a period of significant growth and consolidation. The Zulu kingdom became a beacon of power in southern Africa, a testament to what could be achieved through a combination of military innovation, strategic alliances, and ruthless governance. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Shaka's methods left a trail of destruction and displacement, as countless tribes were uprooted and scattered like leaves in the wind. The economic and logistical realities of maintaining such a vast empire were daunting, but Shaka was nothing if not resourceful. His ability to adapt and innovate allowed him to overcome obstacles that would have stymied lesser leaders. From managing food supplies to forging alliances, Shaka's empire-building phase was a masterclass in the art of ruling, albeit with a liberal dose of tyranny. As we continue to delve into the saga of the Zulu kingdom, it's essential to remember that Shaka's legacy is a tapestry of contrasts. His reign was a period of both creation and destruction, growth and turmoil. The very expansion that brought the Zulu people unprecedented power also laid the foundation for future conflicts and challenges. Shaka's story, is one of ambition and complexity, reminder that history's greatest figures are often as flawed as they are fascinating. So, as the Zulu kingdom continued its meteoric rise under Shaka's leadership, the stage was set for the next act in this gripping drama. The stakes were high, the players were in place, and the tale of the Zulu would only grow more intricate and compelling. Stay tuned as we unravel more of this epic saga, where ambition and power collide in a land as vast and unforgiving as the African horizon. And as the Zulu kingdom surged forward under Shaka's iron-fisted rule, the internal dynamics began to resemble a pot set on the boil, with a lid barely hanging on. You see, building an empire isn't just about expanding borders and collecting trophies, like a kid with a robust Parkayman card collection. It's about managing the people within those borders, and that's where things get spicy. Shaka's leadership style was a heady mix of inspiration and intimidation, and while it forged a kingdom that could flex its muscles across southern Africa, it also sowed seeds of discord that were as potent as they were inevitable. Let's talk about Shaka's leadership style for a moment, a blend of visionary genius and tyrannical terror, like Steve Jobs meets Genghis Khan. Shaka had a knack for motivating his warriors, not with promises of glory, but with the very real threat of a swift and painful demise if they failed. Failure wasn't just an option, it was a one-way ticket to the next life. This approach certainly kept his soldiers on their toes, but it also meant that loyalty was often born of fear rather than respect. It's the kind of workplace environment that might make even the most cutthroat corporate culture look like a company picnic. But fear can only take you so far, and as Shaka expanded his kingdom, cracks began to show. The centralized control that kept the Zulu engine humming also created a pressure cooker of resentment. Chiefs who had once enjoyed autonomy found themselves under the thumb of a ruler who didn't much care for dissent. The very efficiency that made Shaka's kingdom formidable also made it brittle, like a glass sword, sharp and deadly, yet prone to shattering under too much strain. Now, let's zoom in on the year 1828. By then, Shaka's rule was starting to feel like a House of Cards episode, complete with the intrigue, betrayal, and a looming sense of doom. His aggressive expansion had made him enemies on all fronts, and his own people were growing wary of his methods. The Zulu kingdom was a mighty fortress, but one with cracks in its foundation, the kind that could turn a king's dreams into a nightmare. The assassination of Shaka isn't just a tale of palace intrigue. It's a study in the consequences of unchecked power and the human tendency toward rebellion when pushed too far. In September of 1828, Shaka was assassinated by his half-brothers, Dingain and Mhlangana, with the support of his trusted bodyguard, Mbafa. Talk about a family reunion gone wrong. This wasn't a simple coup d'etat. It was the culmination of years of simmering tensions and strategic plotting. It was the ultimate betrayal, a plot twist worthy of a Game of Thrones finale, minus the dragons, but with plenty of drama. Why did it happen? Well, the reasons were as tangled as any political web. Shaka's relentless campaigns had drained the kingdom's resources and stretched its people thin. His insistence on absolute loyalty and his zero-tolerance policy for dissent had fostered a culture of fear and resentment. And let's not forget his increasingly erratic behavior following the death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827. Her passing hit Shaka hard, like a hammer to the heart, and his subsequent actions, such as banning the planting of crops and the use of milk for a year, did little to endear him to his already beleaguered subjects. The plot to assassinate Shaka was as much about self-preservation as it was about seizing power. His half-brothers saw an opportunity to end a reign that was becoming as destructive as it was powerful. The assassination didn't just remove a king. It marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Zulu kingdom, a sharp turn in the road that would lead to further upheaval and change. Shaka's downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of absolute power and the fragile nature of loyalty built on fear. His story is a testament to the duality of leadership. The same qualities that can elevate a leader to greatness can also precipitate their downfall. Shaka's reign was a complex tapestry of brilliance and brutality, a reminder that even the mightiest of leaders are not immune to the vulnerabilities of human nature. Following Shaka's assassination, the Zulu kingdom faced a period of uncertainty and transition. Dingain, who took over as king, had big sandals to fill, and his rule would be marked by its own challenges and controversies. But that's a story for another time. For now, it's enough to acknowledge that Shaka's legacy is one of ambition, innovation, and an unyielding drive for power. A legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire, even as it warns of the dangers of unchecked authority. So, as we wrap up this chapter of the Zulu saga, let's pause to reflect on the man who turned a small tribe into a kingdom, a warrior who redefined the art of war and leadership, but who was ultimately undone by the very forces he unleashed. Shaka's story is a reminder that history is never a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a rich tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, ingenuity, and folly. And as we look to the next chapter, we remember that the story of the Zulu kingdom is far from over, with new challenges and changes on the horizon. Stay tuned, because the drama is only just beginning. The Zulu kingdom, in the aftermath of Shaka's assassination, found itself at a crossroads. Dingaan, Shaka's half-brother and successor, had inherited not just a throne, but a Pandora's box of political challenges. Picture a kingdom as a sprawling chessboard, where each piece is a potential threat or ally, and Dingaan had to play the game with the skill of a grandmaster, or risk losing everything Shaka had built. Dingaan's rule started with a power play that was as bold as it was bloody. His first order of business was to eliminate anyone who might challenge his claim to the throne, including his co-conspirator brother, Langana. If you're thinking this sounds like an episode of Survivor, Zulu Kingdom, you'd be right, except the stakes were a bit more, let's say, life and death. Dingaan's reign would be marked by a mix of consolidation and conflict, as he sought to maintain the power Shaka had amassed, while navigating the internal and external pressures that threatened to dismantle it. The new king's approach to leadership was different from Shaka's, though no less ruthless. While Shaka was a military genius with a penchant for innovation, Dingaan's strength lay in his political maneuvering. He understood that the kingdom's survival depended on balancing the demands of his chiefs, calming the restive populace, and dealing with increasingly bold European settlers on the coast. Now, let's talk about those Europeans for a moment. By the early 19th century, the influx of traders and settlers from across the sea was becoming more than a minor nuisance. The British and the Boers were like uninvited guests who not only crashed the party, but also started rearranging the furniture. The British had established a significant presence in the Cape Colony, and the Boers, Dutch settlers, were expanding northwards, setting the stage for a collision of cultures and interests. Dingaan's interactions with these European powers were a mix of diplomacy and confrontation. In 1837, he met with Boer leader Piet Retief, a man whose ambitions were as vast as the African plains. Retief sought land for his people, and Dingaan, ever the shrewd negotiator, initially seemed amenable to an agreement. However, the peace talks ended in tragedy when Dingaan ordered the execution of Retief and his party in February 1838, fearing that the Boers' land claims threatened Zulu sovereignty. This massacre at Umganganlavu was a turning point that sparked a series of conflicts known as the Boer-Zulu War. The battles that followed were brutal and highlighted the shifting power dynamics in the region. The Boers, armed with muskets and a relentless determination, clashed with the Zulu forces in a series of skirmishes. The most famous of these was the Battle of Blood River in December 1838, where a small Boer force, fortified by a laager of wagons, successfully repelled a much larger Zulu army. The battle was a devastating loss for Dingaan, who found his authority waning as the kingdom struggled to fend off the encroaching settlers. Dingaan's downfall came swiftly, not from the muskets of the Boers, but from within his own ranks. In 1840, he was overthrown by his brother Empand, who had aligned himself with the Boer forces. Exiled and defeated, Dingaan's fate was sealed, and Empand assumed the throne, steering the Zulu kingdom into a new era of relative peace and cautious diplomacy with the European settlers. Empand's reign was a period of consolidation and stabilization. Unlike his predecessors, he prioritized maintaining a balance of power with the Europeans, understanding that outright conflict would only hasten the kingdom's decline. This strategy allowed the Zulu to maintain a semblance of independence, although the looming shadow of colonial expansion was never far from sight. The legacy of Shaka's reign, however, endured long after his death. His military innovations and statecraft had transformed the Zulu into a formidable force, setting a standard for leadership that would be both a blessing and a curse for his successors. The centralized control he established became a double-edged sword, providing stability but also fostering internal tensions that would periodically erupt into conflict. Over time, Shaka's story has been romanticized and mythologized, with tales of his exploits capturing the imagination of historians and storytellers alike. To some, Shaka is a heroic figure, a vision of African resilience and ingenuity in the face of adversity. To others, he is a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of ruling through fear. In truth, Shaka's legacy is neither purely heroic nor villainous. It's a complex tapestry woven from the threads of his remarkable life and the turbulent times in which he lived. The romanticized version of Shaka often glosses over the harsher realities of his rule, the forced relocations, the destruction of rival tribes, and the culture of fear that kept his warriors in line. Yet, these very elements are what made his achievements possible, highlighting the uncomfortable truth that greatness often comes at a significant cost. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, but rather a spectrum of grays, colored by the perspectives of those who lived it and those who retell it. In the grand scheme of Southern African history, Shaka's influence is undeniable. His military tactics and organizational skills have been studied and admired by military historians worldwide. The centralized state he forged laid the groundwork for future governance in the region, and his vision of a unified Zulu identity continues to resonate in South Africa today. As we wrap up this epic tale, let's reflect on the enduring impact of Shaka's reign. His story is a testament to the power of vision and innovation, and a reminder of the complexities that come with leadership. Shaka's legacy is one of transformation, not just for the Zulu kingdom, but for Southern Africa as a whole, a legacy that continues to inspire and provoke debate. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of mighty warriors and sprawling savannas, remember that the story of Shaka and the Zulu kingdom is far from a simple narrative. It's a rich and multifaceted saga that invites us to explore the depths of human ambition, the costs of power, and the enduring influence of one man's vision on the course of history. And with that, we close the chapter on Shaka's era, leaving behind a legacy that is as complex and compelling as the man himself. When it comes to throwing a party, the Etruscans were the bay and say of the ancient world, always extra, never understated, and definitely not for the faint of heart. These folks knew how to turn a simple dinner into a full-blown spectacle, complete with every element you'd expect from a society obsessed with status and the divine. They didn't just eat to live, they lived to feast. Forget about posting your avocado toast on social media. For the Etruscans, every banquet was a chance to flex their social muscles, showing off wealth and influence like a modern-day influencer brandishing a new Rolex. The Etruscans, who thrived in what is now modern-day Tuscany between 900 BCE and 100 BCE, were maestros of the banquet scene. Imagine a world where every meal could be your last, and you've got the Etruscan mindset. Celebrate now, because tomorrow might just be another round of warfare or plague. If you were invited to one of these feasts, you knew you were either really important or related to someone who was. It was the ultimate networking event, with less linked in and more libations. These gatherings were all about status. The bigger and more opulent the affair, the higher your place in the social hierarchy. It was like playing a constant game of one-upmanship with your neighbors, only instead of comparing lawn sizes, you were counting the number of roasted boars and amphorae of wine at your table. If you wanted to make a lasting impression, you needed to go all out. Think of it as ancient times' version of keeping up with the Joneses, but the stakes were much higher. The logistics of organizing an Etruscan feast were nothing short of Herculean. Sure, today we have wedding planners and apps that can coordinate everything from the seating arrangements to the floral centerpieces. Back then, you had to rely on a small army of servants, slaves, and family members to pull off such an event. It was like planning a wedding for 300 guests without the luxury of Google Calendar. You need to coordinate food, entertainment, and of course, wine. Lots of it. An Etruscan banquet wasn't just about eating. It was about indulging every sense, and then some. Religious devotion was another cornerstone of these feasts. The Etruscans were deeply spiritual, and their banquets often had a ritualistic element. Sacrifices to the gods were common, ensuring divine favor for the host. Just imagine preparing your dinner party menu and thinking, do I have enough goat to appease Tinia, the god of the sky? The gods were the ultimate guests of honor, and making sure they were happy was just as important as keeping the human guests entertained. To put this into perspective, imagine the cost of feeding and entertaining hundreds of guests without any modern conveniences. You couldn't just pop down to the local supermarket or call up a caterer. Instead, you needed to organize the production or acquisition of vast quantities of food and wine. And we're not talking about just any food. This was high-quality stuff. The Etruscans were known for their love of game meat, fish, and an array of fruits and vegetables that would make any modern dietitian nod approvingly. But that's not to say they were health nuts. The sheer volume of food consumed would probably make your average nutritionist weep. The Etruscans were also connoisseurs of wine, which flowed as freely as the gossip at these events. Wine was more than just a drink. It was a social lubricant, a symbol of prosperity, and a religious offering all rolled into one. They even had elaborate drinking games, because what's a feast without a little friendly competition? This wasn't just any old plonk either. The Etruscans had a taste for the finer things, importing wines from Greece and other regions, ensuring that their guests were well and truly impressed. Entertainment was another critical component of the Etruscan feast. Think live music, dancing, and maybe even a performance or two. They loved a good spectacle, and just like today, a successful party needed that wow factor. Whether it was a dramatic retelling of a myth or a lively dance number, the goal was to keep guests entertained and engaged. In a world without Spotify or Netflix, live performances were the way to go. In essence, these feasts were a microcosm of Etruscan society, an intricate dance of power, piety, and pleasure. They were the ultimate expression of who you were and where you stood in the social pecking order. So, the next time you find yourself agonizing over a dinner party guest list, spare a thought for the Etruscans. Their gatherings were less about the food and more about the statement they made, a tradition that, in many ways, still echoes through our social gatherings today. And speaking of statements, let's talk about the economic statement that Etruscan feasts made. These weren't just any dinner parties. They were grandiose displays of wealth that could make the Kardashians look like they're hosting a potluck. First, let's wrap our heads around the sheer cost of these shindigs. Picture this. Importing fine wines from Greece wasn't just a matter of sending a quick text to your local sommelier. It was a logistical feat that involved entire trade networks spanning the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about wines that could cost anywhere from a few to several hundred asses, the Roman currency, not the donkey. It wasn't just the distance that made these wines expensive. It was the prestige of serving something that had traveled hundreds of miles just to tickle your taste buds. But why stop at wine? The Etruscans were also obsessed with their utensils. Forget the IKEA cutlery set. These guys were all about bronze. Bronze utensils weren't just functional, they were status symbols. Having a table set with bronze was like driving a gold-plated sports car up to your beach house. Utterly unnecessary, but undeniably impressive. Bronze, being composed of copper and tin, wasn't cheap to produce either. Copper had to be mined from places like Cyprus, while tin often came from far-flung locales like Cornwall. Just think about the coordination involved in getting these metals together in a pre-GPS world. The cost of a single bronze brazier, a must-have for any self-respecting Etruscan host, could be equivalent to a year's salary for a common laborer. Now, why would anyone go to such lengths? This was ancient one-upmanship at its finest. If your neighbor served Greek wine, you served Greek wine with a side of Egyptian dates. If they had bronze utensils, you had an entire bronze serving platter. It was a perpetual game of who wore it better, but with food and drink. And in a society where social standing could determine everything from your marriage prospects to your afterlife accommodations, keeping up appearances was crucial. But let's not get too swept away by the glitz and glam. Behind the scenes, the economic machine driving these feasts was vast and complex. Etruscan cities like Veii and Tarquinia were hubs of trade and commerce, connected to a network that stretched across the ancient world. Merchants, traders, and sailors, these were the unsung heroes who made the magic happen. They braved treacherous seas, and negotiated tricky trade deals, all to ensure that the elite could sip their imported wine in style. In a way, these feasts were the ancient world's equivalent of trickle-down economics. The wealth and demand from the top created a bustling economy below, involving countless professions from miners to metal workers to shipbuilders. Yet, it's worth pondering whether this extravagant lifestyle was sustainable. Etruscan society, with its love of luxury and excess, might have been setting itself up for a spectacular fall. The costs of these feasts were not just financial, but also social. When you're constantly trying to outdo your neighbor, you can quickly find yourself on a slippery slope of debt and resource exhaustion. Some historians suggest that the relentless pursuit of luxury could have contributed to the eventual decline of the Etruscans. Their society, much like an over-leveraged hedge fund, might have been too top-heavy, investing too much in appearances and not enough in stability. So, were the Etruscans just the ancient world's version of a reality TV family, all flash and no substance? Not quite. They were innovators and influencers in their own right, shaping the cultural landscape of their time. But like many societies, their reach sometimes exceeded their grasp. It's a tale as old as time. The allure of wealth and status can drive human behavior to extraordinary and sometimes unsustainable heights. In the end, the Etruscan feasts serve as a reminder that while the party can be thrilling, someone always foots the bill. And when the bill comes due, it's not just about the money, it's about the legacy you leave behind. So, as we continue unraveling the layers of Etruscan society, let's keep in mind that behind the laughter and libations lay a complex web of economics and ambition, a testament to humanity's perpetual dance between indulgence and consequence. Now, let's dive deeper into the cunning social and political ballet that was the Etruscan feast. These weren't just shindigs thrown to flaunt wealth and enjoy a good roast. They were strategic chessboards where power, influence, and alliances were the pieces. Picture a modern-day corporate networking event, but with more garlands, togas, and sacrificial lambs. The Etruscans had mastered the art of schmoozing long before LinkedIn made it a thumb-tiring activity. You see, Etruscan society was as hierarchical as a middle school lunchroom, and these feasts were the perfect venues for social climbers looking to grab a rung or two. If you were an aspiring bigwig, attending one of these parties was like getting a backstage pass to the most exclusive club in town. The guest list was your Rolodex to success, filled with magistrates, priests, and other high-ranking officials who could make or break your career with a nod or a handshake. It was less about enjoying the boar's head and more about making sure you were seen enjoying it. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the idea that Etruscans were just indulgent party animals with no depth. Sure, they knew how to have a good time, but behind the revelry was a shrewd understanding of social dynamics. These feasts were carefully orchestrated to solidify alliances and showcase strength. Imagine a CEO subtly suggesting a merger while passing the wine. That's the kind of maneuvering we're talking about. Every toast, every shared laugh could be a step toward a new political alliance or a confirmation of an existing one. So, where did religion fit into this elaborate social tapestry? Well, the Etruscans didn't just invite a few of their favorite deities to the party for good luck. Religion was a cornerstone of Etruscan life, a thread woven into the very fabric of their feasts. The gods were not just revered, they were schmoozed as well. Sacrifices were made, not just to curry divine favor, but to demonstrate piety and gain a spiritual edge over rivals. Picture it as a divine networking opportunity. Offerings were your RSVP. Speaking of sacrifices, let's not forget the economic muscle behind these events. The Etruscans didn't just throw these lavish affairs on a whim. Each feast was a calculated investment in their social and political capital. The return on this investment, influence, power, and occasionally divine blessings. It was like buying stocks in social standing, with a bull market of boars and wine. And let's not overlook the role of women in this social circus. Unlike many of their ancient counterparts, Etruscan women had a seat at the feast, literally and figuratively. They were not relegated to the sidelines, but were active participants in the social and religious rituals. This was a society where women could wield significant influence, and their presence at these feasts was both a statement and a strategy. Imagine Cleopatra, but with Etruscan flair and a knack for networking. Now, despite all this political maneuvering, the Etruscan elite couldn't afford to rest on their laurel wreaths. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. This wasn't just about social prestige. It was about survival in a world where alliances could be as fleeting as fashion trends. The Etruscans were acutely aware that today's ally could be tomorrow's adversary, and the feast was the arena where these relationships were forged and tested. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of this system. In a world without email follow-ups or strategic retreats, the Etruscans managed to build a society where social gatherings were the lifeblood of politics. It was a high-stakes game played out over high-calorie meals, where every sip of wine and every toast could shift the balance of power. The feasts were not just about indulgence, but about survival and strategy, a lesson that echoes through the ages. As we continue exploring the Etruscan world, remember that these feasts were more than just parties. They were microcosms of a society that was as complex as it was extravagant. The Etruscans may have loved their libations, but behind every sip was a calculated move, a step in the dance of influence and power. So, the next time you find yourself at a dinner party, think of the Etruscans and remember, sometimes the most strategic conversations happen over the dessert course. So, as you're contemplating the last bite of tiramisu at your next dinner gathering, let's pivot to the main course of this historical buffet, the myths and legends that have wrapped the Etruscan feasts in a shroud of alluring mystery. The Etruscans were enigmatic long before it was cool, and much of what we think we know about their feasting habits has been filtered through a lens clouded by time, Roman propaganda, and a healthy dose of ancient gossip. First, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the roasted boar, in the room, the Romans. These guys were the original masters of spin, long before political consultants and media strategists were a thing. The Romans had a vested interest in portraying the Etruscans as the ultimate hedonists, the kind of people who would throw a bacchanal at the drop of a laurel wreath. Why? Because by painting the Etruscans as decadent and morally loose, the Romans could justify their own expansionist endeavors. Conquering a society seen as indulgent and corrupt made Rome look like the hero in this toga-clad drama. And boy, did the Romans have fun with this narrative. They spun tales of Etruscan feasts that rivaled anything you'd find in a Hollywood blockbuster. According to them, the Etruscans were practically drowning in wine and luxury, with feasts that went on for days, attended by a who's who of the ancient world. Roman writers like Livy and Pliny the Elder loved to embellish these stories, creating an image of the Etruscans that was as much fiction as fact. But let's pull back the curtain and see what the archaeological evidence actually tells us. The reality of Etruscan feasts, while certainly lavish, wasn't quite the endless party depicted in Roman accounts. Sure, they had their fair share of opulence, bronze utensils, imported wines, you name it. But these were still events bound by the practicalities of life in ancient Italy. The logistics of feeding and entertaining hundreds of guests meant that while the Etruscans loved a good time, they weren't completely out of touch with reality. And here's a juicy tidbit. Archaeological digs have unearthed amphorae, or ancient wine vessels, that tell us a lot about the Etruscans' drinking habits. These amphorae, often painted with scenes of revelry, suggest that while wine was indeed a staple at these feasts, it was consumed in a somewhat more measured way than the Roman tales suggest. That's right, the Etruscans knew how to pace themselves, at least most of the time. Now, let's talk about the myths themselves. The allure of the Etruscan feast as a symbol of hedonism is hard to resist, isn't it? There's something inherently fascinating about a society that seemed to live by the motto, eat, drink, and be merry. But the romanticized version of Etruscan feasts overlooks the cultural and religious significance these events held. They weren't just opportunities to indulge. They were deeply rooted in the Etruscan spiritual beliefs and social structures. Every feast was a complex tapestry of rituals, social jockeying, and yes, a touch of divine intervention. The Etruscans didn't just party for the sake of partying. They did it to honor the gods, cement their social status, and navigate the treacherous waters of politics. The myths that have grown around these feasts obscure the fact that they were as much about survival and strategy as they were about enjoyment. Speaking of myths, we'd be remiss not to mention the legendary figure of Bacchus, or Dionysus, if you prefer the Greek moniker. The god of wine and revelry was a popular figure among the Etruscans, and his influence is evident in the art and artifacts uncovered from this period. But here's the kicker. While Bacchus might have been the life of the party in myth, the Etruscans didn't worship him with reckless abandon, as Rome would later imply. Instead, they approached their feasting rituals with a sense of reverence and decorum that belied the more hedonistic portrayals. So, what's the takeaway from all this myth-busting? The Etruscan feasts, while undoubtedly grand, were not the wild, unrestrained bacchanals that Roman writers would have us believe. They were sophisticated events that required careful planning, significant resources, and a deep understanding of societal dynamics. The Romans, in their quest to justify conquest and expansion, painted a picture of the Etruscans that was more caricature than reality. But let's not entirely dismiss the charm of these myths. They capture the imagination, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a world that was as colorful as it was complex. Myths often hold a kernel of truth, and in the case of the Etruscans, they highlight the society's flair for drama, its appreciation for the finer things, and its intricate dance between indulgence and discipline. As we continue this exploration, keep in mind that the truth of Etruscan feasts lies somewhere between the embellished tales of Roman historians and the tangible evidence unearthed by archaeologists. It's a delicate balance of fact and fiction, a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the reality we uncover. And as any good historian or dinner party host will tell you, the devil is always in the details. And speaking of details, let's dive into how these Etruscan feasts left their mark on the Romans, those notorious borrowers of cool cultural trends. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, didn't just conquer the Etruscans, they absorbed them, like a sponge soaking up the best bits of an ancient buffet. While they might have spun tales of Etruscan excess to justify their imperial appetites, they were also busy adopting and adapting these very traditions. The Roman convivium, a social gathering that was part feast, part political summit, owes much to the groundwork laid by Etruscan banquets. The Romans took the idea of feasting and ran with it, turning it into an institution where senators could wine, dine, and occasionally plot the downfall of their rivals. But let's not kid ourselves. Romans weren't just in it for the politics. They too understood the sheer joy of a good party, and they weren't afraid to indulge. The Roman love affair with the lavish spread, complete with imported wines and exotic dishes, was a direct nod to Etruscan influence. Yet, the Romans, being Romans, often upped the ante. They introduced the concept of the triclinium asterisk, a dining room with 3 couches, allowing diners to recline while feasting. Talk about taking lounging to the next level. It's as if the Etruscan banquet was the prototype, and Rome delivered the deluxe model, complete with all the bells and whistles of a grandiose lifestyle. Now, about those myths and realities. It's human nature to romanticize the past. Who wouldn't be captivated by tales of endless feasts and divine revelry? But beneath the glamour, there's always grit. The Romans, much like the Etruscans before them, had to face the economic and social realities of such indulgence. These feasts were costly affairs, and the pressure to keep up appearances was a beast all its own. Maintaining social status could mean the difference between political survival and obscurity. The Romans inherited this balancing act from the Etruscans, and it played out in their own society with all the drama of a soap opera set in marble halls. And let's not forget the timeless love of a good party. Whether it's an Etruscan banquet, a Roman convivium, or a modern-day extravaganza, the core elements remain: food, drink, and the company of others. It's as if there's some primal part of us that just loves to gather, eat, and, if we're lucky, make a few new alliances along the way. The Etruscans understood this instinctively, and so did the Romans. The legacy of their feasting traditions reminds us that, at heart, humans are social creatures, drawn to the warmth of shared experiences and the thrill of a well-timed toast. Reflecting on these ancient feasts, we see a mirror of today's world, where social gatherings continue to influence politics, economics, and culture. The parallels are uncanny. Just swap the togas for tuxedos and the amphorae for artisanal cocktails, and you begin to see that the dance of status, power, and pleasure is as old as civilization itself. The Etruscans may have set the stage, but humanity has been improvising ever since. In our journey through Etruscan feasts, we've explored the romance and the reality, the myths and the facts. we've seen how these ancient traditions shaped not just their world, but the Roman world that followed, leaving a legacy that echoes through time. It's a testament to the enduring power of a good party and the intricate web of human relationships that it represents. So next time you raise a glass at a gathering, spare a thought for those ancient revelers who, in their own way, were doing much the same. They remind us that while the details may change, the essence of human connection remains timeless. As we wrap up this historical feast, let's consider the balance these tales strike between romance and reality. Myths capture the imagination, painting vivid pictures that endure through time, while the harsh realities ground us in the practicalities of daily life. Together, they offer a fuller understanding of the past, reminding us that history is neither just a fairy tale nor a ledger of facts, but a rich tapestry woven from both. So, whether you're planning a dinner party or just enjoying a quiet meal with friends, remember the Etruscans. They knew that the best gatherings were about more than just the food and drink. They were about forging connections and shaping the world around them. And in that spirit, we find a legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and delight. Cheers to them and to the timeless art of the feast.